Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back into a time of cracked mud floors, drafty thatched roofs, and stew that never quite tasted the same twice. You're not getting out of this one with a granola bar or a portable charger. We're talking about how people, your ancestors probably, survived when life was one big gamble, and sometimes your prize was just not freezing to death. You probably won't survive this if we're being honest, and that's okay. That's why we're just going to imagine it from the comfort of bed, under a blanket that hopefully wasn't soaked in sheep urine first. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch on your haunches, squinting through the smoke inside your tiny home. Not that it really has a ceiling, it's more of a conical hut made of wattle and daub. That's woven sticks and mud, if you're wondering. Mud, manure, straw, sometimes even animal hair, pressed together like medieval papier-mâché. The result? It stinks, it crumbles, but it works. And in the dead of winter, with frost hanging like lace outside the low wooden door, this clump of dirt and dung is the difference between waking up or freezing stiff. You'd be surprised how strong this stuff is. That wall over there, kicked by a goat daily and still standing, it's resistant to wind, repels rain like a champ when it's patched right, and insulates way better than stone. Though yeah, you do have to occasionally re-smear cow dung on the cracks, which is cosy in its own way. Inside your hut there's a central hearth where the fire is almost always kept alive. No matches, remember. No flint and steel unless you're fancy. Most families protect the flame like it's a baby. You bank the coals at night, pile ash over them, and hope they're still glowing come dawn. If they're not, well, you better hope your neighbour's home is warm and that they're feeling generous. Here's the catch. Your home has no chimney. Smoke just sort of leaks out through the thatch or hangs around to sting your eyes and dry out your throat. Surprisingly, that's a good thing. All that soot coating the rafters, it's antifungal. It keeps bugs out. It even preserves the wood. So yeah, you're basically cold smoking your entire life, and while your lungs hate you, your ceiling beams are thriving. Now let's talk floors. You're standing on packed earth right now. Maybe it's got some rushes strewn about, maybe not. Every so often you throw down new ones, maybe with some mint or lavender mixed in, because the old ones are full of grease, crumbs, and things better left unmentioned. This is your version of spring cleaning. Pile more plants on top of the old gunk and call it fresh. In summer, your walls start to sag. In winter, they harden like clay bricks. In between, you're always patching, always adjusting. But don't think for a second this is primitive. These homes lasted. Archaeologists find the foundation centuries later. Little circles of resilience hidden in the soil. And here's a bit of fringe genius. Some homes had animal stalls built right into the structure. Not because medieval people were obsessed with cows, well, maybe a little, but because those big warm beasts gave off heat. Think of it as bovine central heating. The cow lived in one half, you lived in the other. In a pinch, you might sleep next to it. That's not desperation, that's innovation. Interestingly, there's debate among historians about whether these homes were mostly communal or private. Some say large extended families shared space, while others argue for more nuclear arrangements. But one thing's for sure, space was tight and privacy was laughable. If someone in your hut was sick or had fleas, congratulations, you all did. But here's the crazy part. Despite the dirt, the bugs, and the fact that your kitchen is just the fire, these structures worked with nature. The materials were local. The airflow, though smoky, discouraged moisture build-up. And when a storm rolled in off the hills and battered your village, your little mud bubble often held together better than the fancier stone homes of the nobility. Stone doesn't flex, mud does. You take a deep breath now and the scent of earth and ash fills your nose. It's kind of calming if you ignore the tang of sheep nearby. You're surrounded by walls literally seared with your own survival. No central heating, no modern insulation, just layers of layered wisdom passed down by hands that never Googled a thing. Before you drift off, consider this. While we have modern homes with drywall and synthetic insulation, some of the same building principles are coming back. Eco-builders are revisiting cob walls, off-gridders are insulating with straw and clay. Turns out what kept people alive in 1100 AD is still smarter than it looks. So tonight, as you stretch under clean sheets, remember the family of 5 in a hut the size of your garage, breathing in soot and hoping their fire doesn't go out. They were tired, cold, itchy, and endlessly repairing things. But they made it. You're proof they did. You wake to the gentle bubbling of something that's been simmering for days, maybe weeks. It's not quite soup, not quite stew, it's pottage. And in your medieval world, it's both your breakfast and your dinner. And maybe your dessert too, if someone managed to toss in a wild apple or two last night. You never really know what's in it. That's part of the fun, or the horror. The cauldron hangs heavy over the hearth, suspended on a soot-blackened iron hook that swings out like a lazy arm. The broth is a murky brown-green, flecked with turnip skins, a lump of barley, something fibrous that might be rabbit, and something stringy that might be onion, or mouse tail. You're not picky, you can't afford to be. This is eternal stew, and it's kind of a miracle. The idea is simple. Never let the pot go empty. Every day you eat a little, then throw in whatever scraps you've got, bones, roots, weeds, or the occasional chunk of salted meat if someone got lucky trapping. By keeping it boiling, you avoid rot. You've basically invented the slow cooker, minus the electricity and plus a lot more mystery meat. Over time, the flavour deepens. At least that's the theory. In practice, your stew tastes like a memory of better food. But it's warm, it's filling, it keeps your belly from twisting into knots when the frost hits your boots before sunrise. This bubbling cauldron isn't just dinner, it's the centre of your household economy. Every member of the family contributes. Kids forage for greens. Grandparents snap dry twigs to feed the fire. Teenagers trade with neighbours, maybe a jug of ale for a hunk of root vegetable. The pot tells you how the week's gone. Thin, tough times, rich with grease and floating herbs. Someone made a good trade, or a good kill. Here's the best part though. When something in your stew turns suspect, when it starts to smell a little too alive, you just boil it longer. Problem solved. At least that's the belief. In a time before refrigeration, fermentation and fire are your best allies. That and a strong stomach. Quirky fact for you, some households believe that pottage, when boiled long enough, absorbed medicinal properties from the hearth itself, especially if the hearth was ancient, seasoned with years of meals and family events. There's even a folktale about a widow whose stew cured her village's cough because the fire under it had burned for 3 generations. It's nonsense, probably, but comforting nonsense. This dish, if you can call it that, wasn't just poor food. Richer homes ate it too, especially on fast days, when meat was forbidden. They'd dress it up with saffron, almonds, or sweet wine if they were feeling decadent. But the bones of the thing remained the same. Grains, vegetables, and hope. Always hope. Historians still debate whether the idea of perpetual stew was more fiction than fact. Could a pot really stay on for weeks without going rancid? Some say yes, if the fire never dies and the additions never stop. Others think it is mostly exaggerated, a symbol of endurance more than a practical dish. Still in modern kitchens, as some chefs have tried to replicate it. Spoiler, it works, and it tastes earthy, like a compost bin had a fling with a soup pot. You lift the wooden ladle from the stew and sniff. It's sharp, a little tangy. Maybe someone added fermented cabbage again. You hesitate, then take a sip. It's scalding, hits the back of your throat like a muddy wave and then settles, warm and heavy in your belly. You close your eyes and let it spread through you. Because this is what survival tastes like. Not delicious, not elegant, but real. In a world where winter could kill you and famine always hovered 2 bad harvests away, the pottage pot was your insurance policy. The longer it cooked, the more you trusted it. Even if occasionally it boiled a rat tail or a chunk of last week's bread mould into the mix. A little penicillin never hurt anybody, right? Outside, the sky is dull and grey. You can hear a cart rumbling past on the muddy road and a crow calling out like a gossip with bad news. But you've got warmth, food on knee, and a bowl in your hands. That's more than half the kingdom can say. It's worth noting that communal eating around the pot created strong bonds. The act of dipping in, passing the ladle, sharing the same brew every day, it was oddly intimate. You might have lice, but you have loyalty. You might have nothing in your pockets, but your spoon's always ready. Sometimes, after a feast day, your pot gets an upgrade. A scrap of ham bone, a glistening eye from a fish no one else wanted. And sometimes, only sometimes, you'll taste something sweet. Like a forgotten pear that went soft but not rotten, added secretly by your youngest. It hits your tongue like a secret love note. By now the steam's fogging up your lashes. You lean closer to the fire, stirring the pot lazily. You feel sleepy, heavy with starch and smoke. Your breath is a ghost in the cold room. but you're not afraid. This bubbling, never-ending stew is proof that you're still alive, still scraping by, still strong enough to wake up tomorrow and add one more wild onion to the mix, and you will. Because survival isn't just about muscle and weapons, it's about tending a flame, about trusting that whatever you throw into the pot, grief, bone or root, will feed you in the end. You don't sleep straight through the night. No one does. Not here, not now. In your medieval life, nights come in halves. The first sleep takes you just after sunset, when the sky's gone black and the fire has sunk into a slow, pulsing glow. You curl up under a wool blanket, or maybe just a cloak, your head resting on a rough sack of hay or straw, and drift off in a darkness thicker than you've ever known. No streetlights, no LED glows, just stars and silence. This first sleep lasts about 4 hours. It's deep, full of vivid dreams and that weird, loose, floating feeling, where the world's still attached to your brain by a string. And then you wake up. Not from noise, not from a bad dream, but because your body just does. This in-between time is called the watch or the waking. It's not a glitch, it's normal. Your ancestors expected it. They even planned around it. You rise quietly, the fire is still warm but low. You stoke it gently, coaxing the red coals back into a small flame. Maybe you add a pine knot, watch the sap pop and dance, amber against the black. The house is still except for the slow breathing of those around you, bundled up in their own corners. Sometimes people talk during this gap, whispered conversations, reflections on dreams, maybe even prayers. Sometimes they make love. Sometimes they just sit, eyes open, watching the darkness like it's trying to whisper something back. If you were a monk, this would be the time for nocturnal prayers, matins to be exact. A ritual hour of singing and scripture in the cold stone hush of a monastery. If you were a peasant, you might use this time to mend a bit of clothing by firelight, or knead dough for tomorrow's bread. This hour, this midnight waking was oddly productive. Not frantic, but calm. Like the world paused just for you. The practice has a strange modern echo. Sleep scientists have actually studied this segmented sleep pattern and found it was completely natural. When electric lighting came into our lives, we compressed sleep into one big block. Before that, we lived in rhythm with the fire, with our dreams, with the stars. There's a fringe theory, still debated, that this split sleep may have enhanced mental clarity, that the quiet hour between sleep cycles allowed for a kind of natural meditation. Some historians even suggest this was when people were most creative, when they wrote poetry, made plans, or had religious visions. It's a compelling idea that the most magical thoughts happen when you're only half awake, straddling the dream world like a sleepy tightrope walker. You shift on your sleeping mat, listening to the gentle night sounds, maybe a dog outside snorting in its sleep, or the distant hoot of an owl perched on a crooked rafter. Your breath puffs white in the air, even indoors. You wrap your cloak tighter. Wool, thick and scratchy, but warm. It's probably never been washed, not properly. It smells faintly of lanolin and smoke. It smells like home. You think about the people you know, neighbours, kin, the reeve who walks the village borders with his lantern and staff. Are they awake now too, watching their fires, listening to dreams, feeling that same pause between yesterday and tomorrow? It's like a secret time shared with no one and everyone at once. A little superstition creeps in though. Some say this is the hour when the veil is thinnest. That if you look too long into the dark, something might look back. It's not just folklore. Even now, in the flicker of firelight, you feel that cold tickle on the back of your neck. The sense that someone or something knows you're awake, so you whisper a protection charm under your breath. Something half remembered from your grandmother, and toss a pinch of salt into the fire, just in case. The truth is, this waking time is practical. You've eaten your evening pottage, warmed your feet by the coals, and slept a few hours. Now you check the livestock, take a moment to reflect, and when your eyes begin to droop again, you slip back into second sleep. This second half of the night is lighter, filled with dream fragments and maybe even sleepwalking. You don't mind. Your body's done this 1,000 times before. The rhythms are old, older than church bells or sunrise roosters. You're not tired because this is how humans used to rest. 2 chunks of night stitched together by silence and thought. Not everyone follows the same schedule, though. Nobles might stay up later, their rooms lit with beeswax candles, sharing stories or playing dice games long past sunset. Their fires are bigger, their walls thicker. But even they, with all their riches, eventually bow to the same rhythms of the night. You, on your straw mat, are not so different from the Lord in his tower. Darkness levels all of you. And what about the lonely? The shepherd alone in the hills with only his dog and a skin of ale? The nun in her tiny stone cell writing prayers by moonlight? The outlaw hiding in the forest shivering under wet leaves? All of them waking in that same hour, breathing the same cold air, hearts pulsing in the quiet beat of ancient night. You finally feel sleep tugging at you again. The fire's gone soft, a whisper of heat beneath its crust. You lay your head back down, wrap yourself up in wool and quiet, and slip into second sleep. This time your dreams are different, deeper, warmer, full of strange symbols and echoing voices. You won't remember most of them, but they'll shape how you feel come morning. And maybe that's the beauty of it. That night wasn't something to be conquered in one solid block. It was something to wander through, gently, like a hallway of doors, each one opening onto firelight, memory and rest. Morning comes not with a ringing alarm or sunlight spilling through sleek windows, but with the slow creak of the world warming up around you. The fire stirs itself back to life with a few prods from your poking stick, and you shiver as the first draft slips under the rough door. The air smells of ash, wool and wet soil. Your breath makes clouds in front of your face. You don't really get up. There's no snooze button. But you sort of uncurl yourself from your heap of warmth and misery. First thing you reach for isn't a robe or shoes. It's your cloak. A big, heavy, awkward slab of fabric that functions as your coat, your blanket, your rain shield, your pillow, and, if things get really dire, your burial wrap. Made of thick, tightly woven wool, it itches like sin and smells faintly of lanolin and animal. Which makes sense, it's practically still part sheep. Medieval people didn't have closets stuffed with options. You wore what you had, and what you had to do everything. So your cloak? It goes on first thing in the morning and stays on until sleep takes you again. Sometimes even then. The warmth it holds in isn't just from the fire. It's from your own body, trapped and recycled hour after hour. It's basically a wearable greenhouse effect. But if it's wet, different story. Wool doesn't dry fast, and you're not about to stand by the hearth wringing it out like a dish rag. In fact, if you're poor enough, and let's be honest, you probably are, you might treat your cloak with a splash of, well, human urine. Not fresh, obviously, stale. It's a cleaner of sorts. Also doubles as a primitive wool softener. Weirdly enough, ammonia does what detergent does today. Just don't breathe too deeply when you put it on. And yes, that might be a fringe habit, but it's not fantasy. There are records, especially from places like Iceland and parts of Britain, of garments being soaked in pee to clean, or even weatherproof them. The smell was tolerable if you aired it out long enough, and hey, when everyone smells like pee, no one smells like pee. That's just logic. You fasten the cloak with a wooden pin or maybe a handmade brooch if you're lucky. Underneath, your tunic clings cold and damp to your skin. You've probably been wearing it for several days. You'll keep wearing it until it can't be patched anymore, and even then it might be cut into foot wraps or stuffing for a cracked boot sole. Clothes don't die in the Middle Ages, they reincarnate. Layering is less about style and more about raw survival. You might tuck a scrap of linen under your outer tunic to absorb sweat, especially if you're going out to work the fields. If it's raining, and it probably is, your best bet is another cloak, maybe leather if you're lucky, or some kind of hooded cape. No Gore-Tex, no umbrellas, just layers and layers of animal-based hope. Your feet are wrapped in cloth, not socks. Real socks are a luxury. You've got strips of linen wound tightly to prevent chafing, then shoved into the shoes made of stitched leather, stiff as bark and slick with last night's mud. They barely protect against the cold, but they keep the worst of the wet out, sometimes. Fashion isn't really a thing, not unless you're noble, and even then it's more about showing off your status than dressing for the weather. You're going for functional, rugged, and doesn't smell like something crawled in and died. It's a low bar, but you clear it most days. Interestingly, there's some scholarly debate about how much layering the average medieval peasant did. Some argue they only had a couple of garments to rotate. Others think that colder regions required more complex strategies, like wool-lined caps and leg wrappings. Archaeological finds suggest a surprising range, especially in areas like Scandinavia or the Scottish Highlands, where the cold didn't mess around. One lesser-known trick: grease, rubbing animal fat, goose, pig, whatever's available, on exposed skin, not just for moisture, but for insulation. It forms a barrier. Hunters and shepherds did it when the wind off the moors started to feel like knives. It's gross. It works. You smell like a roast, but you won't freeze to death. Trade-offs: you finally step outside, breathe sharp in your lungs, the frost crunching under your heels. The fields are quiet. Smoke rises from other roofs. Thin grey signals that people are stirring, fires are being coaxed to life, cloaks are being wrapped tight around sleepy shoulders. You adjust your hood and squint at the horizon. No sun yet, just a pale bruise of light. You pull your cloak tighter, tucking your hands into its folds like a hermit crab. You're warm enough, barely. You start to walk. The path is mud slick and root tangled, your feet sliding slightly with every step. You don't walk fast, it's not worth the fall. The damp works its way up your legs, and your fingers are stiff by the time you reach the edge of the village. But your cloak stays in place, heavy, dependable, like a second skin, or maybe a very large, very clingy blanket. And despite everything, the stink, the scratchiness, the fact that you may or may not be wearing old sheep pee, you feel almost dignified. The cloak flaps behind you in the wind like you mean something. Like you're not just surviving, you're enduring. Because in the Middle Ages, survival isn't glamorous. It's not about heroic feats or noble gestures. Sometimes it's just about having enough layers. Knowing how to keep heat in and rain out. Knowing that a little itch now is better than freezing later. And believing, truly believing, that your cloak will get you through another day. Your boots, if you can call them that, sink half an inch into the mud with every squelching step. It's the cold season again, which means the road has turned into a churned-up mess of sludge, horse dung, and yesterday's rain. That's not a puddle you just stepped in. It's a medieval soup of rot and runoff. You pull your cloak tighter, grit your teeth, and keep walking. You're not heading to a marketplace or a cosy tavern. You're going to war. Sort of. It's more like a half-organised clash with the neighbouring village over grazing rights, or maybe a local baron's levy pulling you into some half-baked campaign against people you've never met. Either way, you're marching into the cold and wet with a stick, some hay-stuffed boots, and a grim sense of inevitability. Because here's the truth. Most medieval warfare wasn't knights clashing on pristine fields. It was cold and miserable and deeply unromantic. You grip your spear. It's more like a sharpened broom handle. Your shield, wooden, slightly curved, and painted with your village's crude symbol. Probably an animal that doesn't look quite right. The paint's chipped. The wood's split. But it'll do. It has to. Now here's the clever bit, the part most people don't think about. You're using winter as a weapon. The cold isn't just a hazard, it's a tactic. Marching your half-frozen crew through sleet and wind isn't just about bad luck, it's strategy. If the other side is softer, less prepared, they'll fold. No one wants to fight when their teeth are chattering and their fingers have gone numb. But you've been sleeping in a drafty hut your whole life. You eat cold stew for breakfast. You are winterproof. Mud becomes part of the plan. Rain turns into camouflage. You smear your face with soot. Not because it looks cool, but because it dulls the pale glow of your cheeks under moonlight. You line your boots with straw to soak up moisture. Tuck your trousers into your bindings to keep snow from creeping in. Your cloak gets frozen at the hem, stiff as parchment. But you keep moving. That's the real trick. Always move. Some groups took this to extremes. There are accounts, half legend, half truth, of border raiders in northern England and Scotland who timed their attacks with sleet storms. They'd strike at dawn, the world blanketed in white silence, using the weather as both cover and chaos. They knew the local terrain like a hymn. The invaders didn't. So while the enemy slipped in icy gullies and froze trying to light fires, the locals skulked through bracken and shadows, stabbing from behind before disappearing into the frost. Your group makes camp as twilight bleeds into a darker kind of grey. No tents, just cloaks, wet grass, and a shallow pit for the fire. You dig it yourself, hands blistering on the frozen earth because fire must stay low. No smoke trails, no flickering lights to give you away. The flames are small, hungry things, but they're enough to thaw your fingers and make your breath feel less like smoke. And then there's the mud wall. A clever little defence. Scoop mud and pile it into a ridge around your camp. It won't stop arrows, but it'll slow a charge. If you've got time, you'll even line it with sharpened sticks, crude but effective. The earth becomes armour. Cold, miserable armour, but armour nonetheless. Here's a fringe tactic you wouldn't expect. Icing the field. Some defenders, especially during castle sieges, would pour water over the approach paths at night. By morning, the slope up to the gate was an ice rink. Enemy troops slipped, fell, and became easy targets for archers. It was funny, if you weren't the one face first in the moat. It was one of those subtle, forgotten strategies lost beneath all the sword and honour nonsense. Historians still debate whether armies truly embraced the cold or simply endured it. Some say winter campaigns were rare, too dangerous, too hard on supply lines. Others argue that local skirmishes, especially on the fringes of kingdoms, relied on the misery of the season to give an edge. Because if your enemy is hungry, cold and homesick, you don't need the sharpest sword. You just need to be slightly less miserable. You're not a professional soldier. Almost no one is. You're a farmer, a thatcher, a fisherman turned into a temporary warrior. You don't have formal training or gleaming armour. What you have is familiarity. With the cold, with suffering, with the rhythm of hardship. That counts for something. Your companions eat in silence. Cold bread if they're lucky, dried peas. Maybe someone has a strip of salted meat, tough as old leather. One guy chews on a raw onion like it's an apple. He offers you a bite. You decline. He shrugs and goes back to gnawing. Night falls hard. You pull your cloak over your head, curl up next to a pile of fire-warmed stones, and listen to the wind threading its way through the leafless trees. There's no tent above you, no guard tower watching over your dreams, just the hope that you'll wake up before something steps on your face. But still, you're here. You've made it through the coldest part of the day. Your body aches, your boots are soaked, and your nose feels like it might chip off. But you've endured. And somewhere out there, your enemies are shivering too. Maybe even more than you. Maybe that's enough to tip tomorrow's fight in your favour. Because in medieval warfare, victory doesn't always go to the strongest. Sometimes it goes to the coldest, the muddiest. The ones with straw in their shoes and soot on their faces. The ones who know that warmth is a luxury and misery is just part of the uniform. Your stomach grumbles in a low, hollow tone, like a drum someone left out in the rain. It's been doing that for a while now. You've learned to ignore it, or at least to take it as background noise. Because out here, hunger is part of the landscape. It's just another texture, like mud or frost. Still, eventually you have to answer it. And when you do what every self-respecting medieval survivor does. You dig, scrape, and chew your way through desperation cuisine. You're in the woods now, just outside the village. And your fingers are numb as you dig into a patch of black soil beneath the trees. You're not looking for treasure. You're looking for roots. Anything vaguely edible. Burdock, perhaps. Maybe some wild garlic if you're lucky. There's not much, never is. But you've learned how to spot the thin woody stems that mean something's hiding below. You pull out a lump that looks like a dirty carrot and smells like compost. Perfect. That's dinner. Well, part of it. Back in the lean-to your cousin cobbled together out of logs and moss, you've got something even more magical. Flour made from tree bark. Yes, bark. Specifically the inner bark, soft, pale and stringy once peeled. Dry it, grind it and mix it with a pinch of grain if you've got it. And voila. Bark cakes. They taste like misery, but they fill your gut just barely, and they're not poison, usually. During times of famine, entire communities survived on bark bread. It's a thing. Northern Europe did it often. Scandinavians even gave it a poetic name, famine bread. Sounds rustic, tastes like sadness, but in truth it was genius. The trees, silent and stoic as ever, offered their bodies to fill bellies when the harvests failed. Birch was popular. Pine worked in a pinch. Some people even learned to boil it with milk to soften it, creating a sort of pulp porridge. Comfort food if your comfort zone includes splinters. Your little fire crackles weakly, smoke twisting toward the ceiling of branches. You toss a flat, gritty cake onto the stone slab you've heated near the coals. It hisses, bubbles at the edges, and curls like a leaf in fire. You flip it with a stick. It lands awkwardly. No one cares. You'd eat it if it fell in the dirt. Dirt adds flavour. Then there's leaf bread. Thin sheets of dough rolled out so fine they're almost transparent, pressed with patterns and fried over embers. Sounds beautiful, right? And it is in the Icelandic tradition, where they made them into delicate holiday treats. But for you, it's just another way to stretch a handful of barley into something that doesn't vanish in 2 bites. You don't decorate it. You just want it not to burn. You chew your meal slowly. The bark cake crumbles into dry bits, sticking to your molars. The root is woody and slightly bitter. You dip it into the hot ash to cook it a little more. It softens slightly. It's not delicious. It's not even satisfying. But it silences the noise in your belly for a little while. That's a victory. There's a fringe theory floating around among modern scholars that some of these harsh, famine-driven foods, were deliberately kept simple and plain, not just for survival but as a spiritual act, a kind of voluntary humility. Monks, for instance, often ate coarse bread and bitter herbs even when finer foods were available. Some argue that entire villages adopted similar patterns during lean years to show solidarity or spiritual resilience. Others say no, people just ate whatever they could find because dying was worse. Both can be true. In truth, medieval survival wasn't just about food. It was about rituals, little acts of defiance against the void. You cut your bark thinner today than yesterday. You boiled that root a few extra minutes. You told a joke while cooking it, even if no one laughed, even if no one was there. That's how people stayed alive. And sometimes, very rarely, you'd find something extraordinary. A single egg left behind by a wandering hen. A handful of wild berries, not quite shriveled by the frost. Once, your uncle claimed he caught a squirrel with his bare hands, roasted it whole and gnawed it like a roast duck. You're not sure you believe him, but you've retold the story half a dozen times anyway. It gives people hope, even if it's nonsense. There's the still debate over how common bark and leaf-based foods were outside of Northern Europe. Some historians argue that southern climates had better forage options and didn't rely on such extreme substitutions. Others point out records of people in France and England resorting to acorns, nettles, and even clay. Yes, clay. One French chronicler mentioned poor villagers mixing chalky soil with water to soothe the belly. That's not a recipe, that's a confession. You swallow the last of your bark cake and lean back, watching the sky filter through the trees. It's turning amber now, and the wind's picking up, pulling smoke sideways. You feel tired but not weak. There's something weirdly invigorating about eating survival food, like your body knows you earned every bite. You poke the fire again, nudge another chunk of root into the heat, and wrap your cloak around your knees. This isn't a feast, it's not even a meal, but it's yours, scraped from the ground, shaped by your hands, cooked on your fire. It's not about flavour, it's about not giving in. And that, you realise, is the quiet, gritty heart of medieval survival, enduring through taste, through texture, through the daily chew of something that shouldn't be food, but somehow still is. Every bite says, I'm still here. Even when the world tells you otherwise, you scratch your head, slowly and with purpose, not because you're confused, but because it itches. Again, it always itches. In fact, you're not sure you remember a time when it didn't. Welcome to the medieval scalp situation. A delicate, ever-evolving symphony of grime, oil, and uninvited guests. Lice are a fact of life now. They're in your hair, your clothes, probably even in the seams of your cloak. You don't panic. You don't scream. You grab your bone comb and get to work. Yes, it's made of actual bone, not plastic, not wood, but carved from something that once mooed or oinked. The teeth are narrow, almost painfully so, perfect for dragging little wriggling intruders out of your matted locks. And believe it or not, it's one of the most prized items you own. This comb gets passed down like a treasure. It's both tool and ritual, daily warfare against the crawling chaos. Hygiene in your world isn't what modern folks imagine. You don't bathe every day, or every week. Sometimes not even every month, especially in winter. Water is cold and your firewood's too precious to waste on heating a tub. Soap is a luxury, and good luck finding a clean basin that isn't also used for dishes, laundry, or soaking meat. Instead, you rely on clever tricks passed down from your elders. You know how to use ash, yes, ash from your fire, as a kind of dry shampoo. It absorbs oil, gives your hair a dull grey matte finish, and most importantly, discourages lice. You rub it in, let it sit, then comb again. The sound of the comb snagging through your hair is as common as birdsong. And that's not all. You use vinegar when you can find it to kill nits. You've heard that people in other villages smear crushed garlic on their scalp, though that's controversial. Some say it wards off evil. Others say it wards off people in general. One guy tried using goose fat once. He still hasn't lived it down. There's a strange pride in all this. Cleanliness, medieval style, is an active state. It's not about pristine appearance. It's about control, about showing the world that while the lice may nibble, you still run the show. Even the upper class, despite their fancy linens and scented oils, dealt with the same problems. There are documented cases of noble ladies carefully combing their wigs, which were often worse than real hair when it came to infestation. And monks? They shaved the middle of their heads not just for religious humility, but partly because it made the daily knit battle a little easier. Your clothes don't help, of course. Wool holds heat, moisture and bugs like it was designed for them. You turn your tunic inside out regularly and beat it against rocks or trees to shake out the worst of it. If you're lucky enough to have access to a hot spring, or even better, if your village has a bathhouse, you go when you can, not just for the soak but for the scrubbing. And yes, people did scrub. With reeds, with cloth, sometimes with sand. Sand works wonders if you don't mind losing a layer of skin. The bathhouse, if it exists, is both sacred and slightly chaotic. Men and women bathe in shifts, separated in most cases, but not always. Some towns don't bother. Steam fills the room, smells of sweat and mildew and herbs. People chat, gossip, even strike deals while scrubbing behind their ears. It's a social ritual, not just a hygienic one. And when you leave, flushed and dripping, you feel more human than you've felt in weeks. There's a fringe theory among scholars that medieval people were obsessed with cleanliness in ways we underestimate. Some archaeologists point to the regular discovery of grooming tools, combs, tweezers, even earpicks, as proof that hygiene was a daily concern. Others argue that the obsession wasn't about health, but about morality. Cleanliness as a sign of inner virtue. After all, sermons often equated dirt with sin. And yet despite your best efforts, there's always something crawling. You stop caring after a while, you make peace with the fact that you're a temporary home to an entire ecosystem. You joke about it with your neighbours. You pick lice off each other while chatting about the weather or whose cow just had twins. It becomes background noise. Gross, yes, but not disgusting. Just part of life, like mud or smoke. Still, there are moments when you crave the feeling of being truly clean. After a hard rain, you'll strip down and stand under the storm, letting the water rinse away the itch, the oil, the guilt. You scrub your scalp with river sand and laugh out loud, even if you're freezing. Even if you catch a chill and spend the next week coughing like a church bell. Because that fleeting moment, when the lice crawl off, when your skin stops itching, when you can smell nothing but the earth and the water, that's real freedom. You don't need lavender or rose oil, you just need a quiet moment and a trickle of water that doesn't smell like sheep. In the end, hygiene in the Middle Ages is a balancing act. Between practicality and ritual, between gross and necessary, between lice and the bone comb that says, not today. You scratch, you comb, you dust yourself with ash and you move on. And somehow that becomes its own kind of cleanliness. Not sterile, not spotless, but defiant. A clean that says, I'm trying. In a world where everything is trying to break you down, that's more than enough. Your hands are already sore. And the sun isn't even over the treetops yet. You stand hunched in a field that barely qualifies as one. More rocks than soil, more weeds than grain. In one hand, you grip the rough, time-polished handle of a wooden plough, and with the other, you guide the donkey that really doesn't want to be here. Neither do you, frankly, but if this land doesn't get turned, you don't eat. So here we are. The plough squeals against the dirt, dragging up thick clumps of earth like scoops of frozen cake. Only not as delicious. Every root you hit sends a jolt up your arms. Every stone might shatter the wooden blade if you're not careful. This is not easy labour. It's not noble or romantic. It's back-breaking, finger-splitting survival that starts before your breakfast and ends when the light gives out. Your plough isn't the sleek, iron-tipped kind used by richer folks with bigger fields and the better livestock. No, yours is what's sometimes called an ard. A simple light plough that doesn't even turn the soil properly. It scratches it, disturbs it just enough to drop seeds in and hope the wind doesn't take them away. It works best in loose, sandy soils, which means in your dense, stone-riddled patch it's barely functional. You drag it anyway, teeth clenched, feet slipping. And here's a little-known medieval fact. People didn't always use oxen. Sure, oxen were stronger, but they were expensive to keep. You, like most peasants, are making do with a donkey or even a cow. Not because it's ideal, but because it's what you have. Some people even ploughed their land with dogs or their own family members when animals weren't an option. That's not legend. That's Tuesday. You pause to wipe your face on your sleeve. The sweat mixes with dust and turns to a sticky paste on your skin. You've been at this for an hour, and your back already feels like it's one sneeze away from permanent damage. You're 17, you feel 80. Your hands are blistered, your nails black with dirt. You haven't stood up straight all day. The rhythm of medieval farming is relentless. Plough, plant, weed, harvest, repeat. The tools are rudimentary, wood, bone, maybe the occasional scrap of iron if you're lucky or well connected. Maintenance is your responsibility. If the handle splinters, you carve a new one. If the blade chips, you patch it with twine and hope for the best. And yet, there's a quiet genius in these tools. They're simple, sure, but they're adapted to your land, your life. You know exactly how much weight your donkey can pull. You know how deep the plough needs to cut before seeds can take hold. You even know, by smell, when the soil is ready. That dark, almost sweet scent rising from the turned earth. That's the good stuff. That's the stuff that might feed you through winter. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about just how inefficient medieval agriculture really was. Some researchers argue that peasant methods were crude, outdated, and led to frequent famines. Others push back, pointing to surprising yields and local adaptations. Truth is, both are kind of right. The land wasn't generous, but people learned to coax life from it anyway. And let's not pretend every inch of medieval land was used sensibly. There are records of entire communities using open field systems, great communal strips of land divided among villagers, rotated each season to avoid depleting the soil. It worked, mostly. But if you drew the short strip, the one riddled with rocks and thistle, you were just out of luck. The only solution was more work, or prayer, usually both. You stop for a moment, straighten your back with a groan, and glance over at the neighbouring field. Old Merrick's already halfway done with his row. He's got a sturdier donkey and a stronger back. You envy him, but only a little. You'll trade labour later anyway. That's how survival works out here. Shared muscle, shared sweat, shared bread. Your sister appears at the edge of the field holding a small clay jug of water and a bundle of boiled turnips wrapped in cloth. She doesn't say anything, she doesn't have to. You both know how this day will go. You take the water, swig it down, and offer her a bite of your own root cake from breakfast, which she politely declines. She knows where it came from. You sigh and hand her the plough rope. Her turn. Child labour? Of course, medieval children worked young, by 7 or 8. They were hauling water, picking weeds, chasing crows away from fields. You didn't get a childhood. You got chores. If you were lucky, you also got songs and stories while you worked. Sometimes, if your parents weren't too tired. Your sister drives the plough now, small hands gripping the reins, hair tied back with a strip of fraying linen. She's stronger than she looks, most kids are, not because they were born tough, but because they never had the luxury of being soft. You take a moment to breathe, to look out over your small patch of earth, and feel something. Not pride exactly, not peace, but maybe a kind of gritty respect. For yourself, for the land, for the donkey who keeps trying to wander off. You pull him back gently, scratching behind his ears. He doesn't care about your existential crisis, he just wants the thistles. And maybe that's the lesson here. You don't need the land to love you, you just need it to tolerate you long enough to grow something edible. The rest? That's just muscle, mud, and knowing exactly how deep to dig. There's something dripping, not water, too slow. It's thick, syrupy, with a smell that tells your brain this isn't good. You lean closer to the small woven basket in the corner of the hut, the one filled with cloth scraps, dried herbs, and your cousin Edric, who's been coughing since the last full moon. He's asleep now, sweating through his blanket, face pale and waxy like a candle left in the sun. You sigh, not because you don't care, but because you do, and you don't have a single clue what to do about it. Time to try smoke magic again. You head outside and pick your way through the wet yard, avoiding the puddle where the pig likes to wallow. Your feet are bare, boots are for travelling, and the cold grass makes you hiss between your teeth. You duck into the lean-to where you keep your bundles of dried plants, mugwort, yarrow, rosemary, a few suspicious handfuls of something that might be hemlock. You've labelled it with a skull just in case. You pull out a bundle of sage and another of juniper, then dig in the ash bin for a chunk of resin from last winter's pine. Back inside, you toss the herbs on the fire and crouch low, coaxing the flames into a soft orange ribbon. The smoke rises, slow and thick, filling the hut with a smell that's equal parts funeral and forest. Edric coughs again, but at least now it's in rhythm with the crackling of the fire. You sit beside him, gently waving the smoke toward his face. That's what the midwife said to do. Or maybe she said the opposite. She speaks mostly in riddles and eye twitches. This is the shadowy realm of folk medicine. You're not a healer, but you've watched enough of them to fake it. There's no doctor here. No sterile tools. You've got smoke, spit, and the collective memory of every grandmother who ever whispered secrets over a boiling pot of weeds. That's enough. It has to be. And believe it or not, some of it works. Juniper smoke is mildly antiseptic. Mugwort can soothe fevers. Even rosemary, crushed and boiled, makes a passable tonic. But the real trick is belief. If the patient believes in the cure, sometimes they really do feel better. It's not magic. Or maybe it is. There's a fringe tale from an old crone 2 villages over who swears she cured her brother's leg rot by burying a chunk of bread under a crossroads on a new moon, then boiling it and rubbing the mush into the wound. He survived, somehow, which just proves that either the bread worked or the man was too stubborn to die. You dip a cloth in cool water and press it to Edric's forehead. His eyes flicker open, red-rimmed, unfocused. He mumbles something about crows and soup. You whisper that he's going to be fine, though you're not sure that's true. Not because you want to lie, but because words are part of the cure too. Sometimes they do more than herbs ever could. You reach for the smoke bowl, lift it carefully, and move it around the room. The soot on the walls catches the light and glows faintly. That black crust lining the rafters. It's old smoke, months, maybe years of it. People think it keeps evil out. Maybe it just keeps bugs out. Maybe both. You whisper a small charm as you walk. Out sickness, out, go find a stone to cling to. It's not poetry, it's habit. Something your mother used to say. Folk cures are full of these little rituals. Burn the hair of a healthy dog and wave the smoke at the ill one. Press a stone to a sick person's back and throw it into a river. Bury eggshells under the threshold to confuse spirits. Most of it sounds ridiculous, but when you've seen someone recover, really recover, after you've done these things, it sticks. Logic comes later, if at all. Scholars still argue whether these practices were superstition or early science. Some say it's all placebo, others point out that herbalism often worked, and that medieval folk, though uneducated by modern standards, weren't fools. They observed patterns. They knew which plants numbed pain, which leaves helped blood clot, which smokes kept the rot away. It wasn't chemistry, not yet, but it was something. You reach for a jar near the hearth, honey and garlic mashed into a sticky poultice. It smells like hope dipped in regret. You smear a bit on Edric's lips, and he groans. You mutter an apology. You know it won't taste good, but it might help. Garlic's a natural antibiotic. Honey seals wounds. Together, they're one of your best weapons against whatever's trying to kill your cousin. Another weird fact. Sometimes people brewed potions using animal fat soot and bits of iron. They'd stir it with a knife, chant over it, and pour a few drops on a wound. And sometimes, just sometimes, the wound healed. Was it the iron, the fat, the chant? No one knows, but you do it anyway, because when death is breathing down your neck, you don't wait for a controlled study. Edric drifts back into a fitful sleep. The fire's dying again, but you're too tired to tend it. You lie beside him, wrapping the scratchy wool blanket around both your shoulders, your nose full of smoke and garlic. The hut smells like an herb garden lit on fire, but you don't mind. It smells like effort, like care. Outside, the wind picks up, brushing against the roof with long, whispering fingers. You close your eyes and hope that the smoke, the herbs, the charm, and maybe just your stubborn will are enough to keep the sickness from winning tonight. Because out here, medicine is whatever you have, plus everything you hope still works. You stand back from the wall, hands on your hips, squinting through the haze of smoke and dust. It's ugly, you'll admit that. The surface is uneven, lumpy in places, streaked in others where the mixture slid down before it dried. But it's done, and more importantly, it just might keep your house from burning down the next time someone gets careless with the hearth. Because today you've done what every savvy medieval homeowner eventually learns. You've fireproofed your walls with milk and lime and a little bit of hope. You didn't invent this method, obviously. It's old enough that no one remembers who figured it out first, but they were smart. You take powdered lime, crushed from limestone or chalk, and mix it with water until it becomes this thick, goopy mess. Then you add something sticky to make it cling better. Milk is the go-to if you have it, especially curdled milk, because it's full of casein, a natural binder. Some folks use eggs or animal blood. One guy down the road swears by cheese whey. You don't ask questions. You slather the paste over the wooden beams and daub walls of your home like you're icing the world's worst cake. The smell is horrendous. Sour, chalky, with a strange tang that lingers on your tongue, even when you're not breathing through your mouth. But once it dries, it hardens into a smooth, pale crust that resists flames like a champ. You've even seen fire crawl right up to a lime-washed surface and just stop. It hisses and smoulders but won't catch. That's the miracle. This method isn't just for fireproofing either. It keeps bugs out, seals up cracks, and reflects light so your home feels brighter inside. And once it sets, it stays put. It doesn't peel or flake like paint. In fact, it is paint in a way, a breathable, natural coat that protects your walls and your peace of mind. If you're feeling fancy, you can add natural pigments to the mix and colour your walls with red ochre, green earth, or carbon black. But let's be honest, you're probably going with the classic bone white. It's timeless, it's cheap, and it smells less awful once it's dry. There's a running joke in your village. If the fire doesn't get you, the fumes will, but that's just gallows humour. Everyone knows someone who lost a home to a cooking fire, or to lightning, or just to a stray coal kicked loose in the middle of the night. You don't have insurance, you have lime wash, and luck, and maybe a bowl of water near the door if you're especially cautious. This method of using lime plaster, sometimes called whitewash, isn't unique to your village. It's all over Europe, from cottages in the English countryside to farmhouses in Bavaria. There are even records of churches coated with it, both to protect the wood and to symbolise purity. Some scholars believe its use predates written history. Others argue it spread rapidly after the Roman period, when people figured out how useful lime could be once you stopped trying to eat it and started building with it. There's still a debate about how often people actually reapplied it. Was it seasonal maintenance? A once-a-decade ordeal? Evidence is murky. Some surviving buildings suggest frequent coats layered over each other, like geological strata. Others show just one thick layer, carefully applied and left alone. Your guess is as good as any. You step back inside now, wiping your hands on your already filthy tunic. The air smells sharply alkaline, with a faint milky tang. It's not pleasant, but it's not dangerous anymore. The lime has set. The walls feel cool to the touch, smooth and almost stone-like. You tap a knuckle against one beam and smile when it gives a satisfying thunk. Solid. Safe. Or safer, at least. Your younger brother peeks around the corner, holding a small bowl of porridge and looking unconvinced. "Is it dry?" he asks, voice muffled around a mouthful. You shrug. "Dry enough. Don't lick it." He licks it. Course he does. He makes a face like he just bit a lemon and wanders off. That's your quality control department right there. While the walls dry completely, you move on to sealing the gaps in the thatch above. Rain's coming. Again. It always is. You poke at the reeds with a long pole, checking for soft spots, wiggling bundles into place with one hand while clutching a fistful of moss with the other. Every leak you patch now is one less drip on your forehead tonight. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like to live in a stone house. Something with solid walls, a chimney, maybe even glass windows. Not because you crave luxury, but because you're tired of rebuilding every season. But stone burns too, just slower, and when it does, it's harder to repair. At least with daub and lime, you can patch things up with your own 2 hands and a bit of goat milk. There's a fringe tale passed down by your great-aunt about a village that survived a great fire because every house had lime-plastered walls. The flames roared through the fields, consuming everything in their path, but the home stood, scorched but unburned. People called it a miracle. You call it chemistry, not that you'd ever use the word. It's just what works. Outside, the sun sinks lower, painting the sky in long strokes of gold and soot. The light hits your newly washed walls and makes them glow. For a second, your whole hut looks pure, like a beacon. You know it won't last. The smoke, the soot, the damp, life will claw back in. But for now, you've built something that says, "Not today, fire, not this time." You sit by the hearth, now ringed in the same pale paste, and toss in a few twigs. The flame dances, casting its glow against the milk-washed wall. It flickers, kisses the surface, and backs away. That's your victory, quiet, chalky, and real. Because out here, survival isn't just about having food or keeping warm, it's about knowing how to shape your home into something that pushes back when the world tries to burn it down. You push open the wooden trapdoor with both hands, the hinges groaning like they haven't been moved since the last time someone panicked. Cold, damp air immediately spills up into your face, cooler than the outside breeze and somehow older. It smells like mould, dust, and buried secrets. You swing your legs down into the darkness, feeling for the top step of the ladder. 1, 2, oh, 2, oh. There it is. And then, carefully, you descend into the belly of the house, the cellar. It's not much, just a low, stone-lined room carved out of the earth beneath your home. But down here, Beneath the dirt and the soot and the shouting daylight world, things are quiet. Things last. This is where you stash the turnips, the carrots, the jars of pickled eggs floating in their cloudy brine. And if you're lucky, a slab of smoked bacon, wrapped tightly in cloth and smelling faintly of ash and heaven. The walls are cool and slick to the touch, the kind of cold that never quite disappears, even in summer. You duck low to avoid hitting your head on the crossbeam again, and step onto the uneven stone floor. It's damp, of course, but not wet. Just enough to keep the air heavy and still. You can hear the faintest drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the corner. A good sign, means your cellar's still alive. You walk past the shelves, rough planks balanced on stacked stones, where clay jars wait like ancient gods, each sealed with wax and twine. Some hold dried beans, others pulses, and one has what might be honey, though it's crystallised into something closer to sugar rock. You have a few apples too, small, green and spotted, but still crisp if you eat them in the dark and don't look too hard. Everything down here has a shelf life measured in seasons, not weeks. This is your survival stash, your rainy day reserve, and lately every day's been a little rainy. Funny thing about medieval life, upstairs the world is chaos, but down here it's science, or at least what feels like science. You're using geothermal cooling even if you've never heard the term. You know this. Dig deep enough, line it with stone, keep it shaded and dry, and food lasts longer. Not because anyone explained it, but because someone showed you, and because if you mess it up, everything rots. Then you starve, you run your fingers along a cured sausage hanging from a rafter. It's hard as wood now, which means it's probably perfect. You slice off a piece with your belt knife and chew thoughtfully, letting the salt cut through the musty air. It tastes like preservation, like labour, like time slowed down and got stuffed into a casing. There's a growing academic theory that medieval storage methods were more advanced than we give credit for. Sure, they didn't have thermometers or vacuum seals, but they had centuries of trial and error. They knew how to keep root vegetables viable into the spring, how to pack butter in barrels of brine, how to hang herbs in bundles so they dried evenly and didn't mould. It wasn't flashy, but it worked, most of the time. You reach for a jug, cool to the touch, heavier than you expected, and tilt it gently. Mead, probably, or vinegar, or both. You pull the wax stopper, sniff it, and immediately regret everything. Vinegar, definitely vinegar. But useful, you can clean with it, disinfect with it, even drink it, in small doses. If you're feeling brave or you're out of everything else. There's a small bundle in the corner wrapped in cloth. You unroll it carefully, revealing the real treasure. Dried mushrooms. Foraged from the woods and laid out to shrivel in the sun, these little fungi are worth more than gold when stew season arrives. You don't get flavour like this from anything else. Earthy, sharp, just a little funky. You're not even sure if all of them are safe. One or two look like they might talk back if boiled. But you've eaten worse. And there's the salt box. An actual wooden box filled with coarse salt, grey and slightly damp from the air. Salt preserves meat. Salt cleans wounds. Salt is survival. You trade for it whenever you can. Some families store it in ceramic pots. You keep yours in a box because you like the way it looks when you open it, like you're opening a chest of treasure. Just granulated treasure that stings if it gets in your eye. Here's something strange. You've heard of people storing apples with straw or pine needles to make them last longer. Some even hang them from rafters on little strings so the air flows around them. It's weird, but it works. You've done it. 1 apple a month in winter can feel like a miracle. A tart, chewy, wrinkled miracle. Your cousin once tried to store fish in a pit lined with snow and packed with pine boughs. Didn't work. It thawed. The smell was biblical. But that's the game. You try. You fail. You try again. And over time, your cellar becomes not just a pantry, but a storybook. Each jar and bundle a memory of something that didn't kill you. You blow out the lantern and climb the ladder back up into the main room. Your head emerges into warm light and the smell of the fire, where your mother's baking oatcakes on a flat stone. You nod once. She nods back. No words needed. She knows you went down there for supplies, maybe even just to check. There's comfort in knowing the food is still there, still waiting. Because in the medieval world, the cellar isn't just about storing food, it's about storing certainty. You can't trust the weather, you can't trust the crops, but you can trust the cold earth to keep your carrots crisp and your beans dry. And sometimes that's enough to keep going. You sit by the hearth, carefully dragging the carved teeth of your lice comb through your tangled, greasy hair. It's almost meditative at this point. The slow scrape, the little flick of the wrist to check for passengers, the pile of tiny carcasses you flick into the fire without ceremony. You're not the only one doing it. Your older sister is squatting nearby with her back to you, sleeves rolled up, working the same dance through your cousin's thick curls. It's a family affair, a grooming ritual, a daily exercise in humility and mutual suffering. Here's the thing they don't tell you about the medieval world. Everyone has lice. Rich, poor, male, female, priest, peasant. It doesn't matter. If you have hair, you have company. And if you don't, you probably shaved it to get rid of them. Either way, the battle is constant. But it's not disgusting in the way you might think. Not here, not now. It's just normal, like brushing your teeth. If people brushed their teeth. Your comb is a treasure. Smooth, pale bone with teeth so fine they could catch a whisper. It's small enough to tuck into your belt pouch, but precious enough to keep close. You clean it with vinegar when you can, or just scrape it clean with a twig. It's not decorative, it's survival. But lice are only half the story. Fleas, too, hop their way through homes like unwanted guests at a feast. They live in the rushes on the floor, in your bedding, even in your seams. You're not safe even under your cloak. That's why you air it out every morning. Hang it over a line or the edge of a fence, let the wind blow through it. Let the sun do its quiet purifying work. Sometimes you slap it with a stick for good measure. It looks ridiculous. You don't care. You once saw a nobleman's wife at the market sitting on a silk cushion while a servant picked through her hair, inspecting each strand with grim devotion. She didn't even flinch when they found something and crushed it between fingernails. It was a sign of status, oddly enough. Not that she had lice, but that she had someone else to deal with them. You, on the other hand, do it all yourself. Or with family. Or with whoever's sitting close enough by the fire to lend a hand and a comb. There's a strange intimacy to it. You sit shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed, speaking in soft murmurs or not at all, while the comb moves through the hair like a slow tide. It's how secrets get shared, how arguments soften, how silence gets filled with presence. You've pulled more confessions out of someone's scalp than you ever did from their mouth. And it's not just about bugs, it's about order. When everything else, food, shelter, weather, feels like a gamble, at least your hair is under control, sort of. It's one small patch of chaos you can tame. Some people in your village swear by potions, a mixture of vinegar, herbs and old oil, rubbed into the scalp to kill the crawlies and discourage more. Others just tie a scarf over their hair and ignore the problem until it itches too much to bear. And still others, usually those with more coin, boast perfumed oils and scented soaps. But even they aren't safe. You once met a travelling peddler who swore he saw a monk with a halo of fleas around his tonsure. Divine punishment, maybe. Or just warm skin and bad luck. There's a minor scholarly debate about how seriously medieval people took hygiene. Some records suggest daily grooming was common, especially combing and toothpicking. Others argue that standards varied wildly by region, season and social class. What's clear is that people noticed dirt. They noticed lice. They didn't shrug it off entirely. It wasn't considered charming. It was just persistent, like rain or taxes. Fringe practices pop up in local gossip all the time. One girl swears that rubbing mashed nettles into her scalp keeps the bugs away. Another claims she sleeps with garlic braided into her hair. Your neighbour once tried heating a comb in the fire, letting it cool a few seconds, then dragging it through his beard to fry the bastards. He screamed for an hour. Didn't stop him from doing it again. Even more strangely, lice sometimes became status markers in reverse. A visiting friar once said, half seriously, that a body without lice must be too poor to feed them. It was meant as a joke, mostly, but there's a truth buried in there somewhere. Lice feed on warmth, on warm blood, on life. If you're cold, starving and too far gone, they abandon you. So yeah, gross as it is, a few lice mean you're still warm-blooded, still alive. After a while, you pull your comb away and inspect it. A few dark specks wriggle feebly in the teeth. You crush them between your nails with a practiced click. Satisfying. Not because you enjoy it, well, maybe a little, but because it's a win. A tiny, squirming victory. You hand the comb to your sister. She's next. She groans dramatically and starts working through her own hair with exaggerated suffering. You roll your eyes and go back to untangling the knots behind your ear. There's always more. There's always more. And when you're done, you wrap your hair in a cloth and toss your outer tunic onto the sun-warmed stones outside. You'll shake it out later, maybe beat it with a stick, maybe dunk it in the stream if the day's warm enough, but for now, you've combed. You've cleaned, you've asserted a little dominance over the microscopic rebellion happening across your body. And in a world where survival often comes down to inches and itches, that's no small feat. The dice clack across the wooden table with a sound that's equal parts satisfying and suspicious. You squint at them, 2 small cubes carved from bone, corners worn smooth, pips barely visible under the grime of generations. They land unevenly, one cocked against a splinter, the other wobbling before settling. Your opponent grins, eyes catching the firelight like a fox who knows something you don't. You sigh. Another copper gone. But it's not about the copper. Not really. It's about the distraction. Because out here, tucked in the corner of a smoky tavern with a mug of something vaguely fermented in your hand, you're not thinking about the rain leaking through the roof back home. You're not thinking about the blisters on your hands from chopping firewood, or the neighbour's cow that trampled your garden, or the mysterious rash on your forearm that might be cursed or just dirty. Right now you're focused on bone dice, bad ale, and not getting cheated too obviously. Games were survival tools, you realise, long before they were pastimes. In a world where your day could end with a fever, a fire, or a farming accident, games gave you control. Just for a while, you roll the dice, you move the pieces, you play the hand. It doesn't matter if your house is made of wattle and you've eaten nothing but pottage for 3 weeks straight. When you play, you're a player. Not a victim, not a serf, just someone with a chance. And the games vary. Right now, it's hazard. A brutal game of chance that somehow manages to be both incredibly complex and completely luck-based. You've heard of nobles betting entire estates over it. Your wagering buttons still feels dangerous. Sometimes you play Nine Men's Morris, scratched into a stone slab with pebbles or bent bits of bone for markers, or Fox and Geese, a game of imbalance and cunning, or just simple knuckle bones, literal animal bones, tossed like jacks, sometimes with rules, sometimes without. You once spent an entire evening trying to beat a 12-year-old at a game where the only goal was to keep the bones from falling off the table. You lost, repeatedly. The tavern is packed tonight, full of sour smells and half-laughter, the air thick with the smoke of damp firewood and scorched onions. A group of labourers are singing something tuneless near the hearth, and someone's trying to play a lute with 3 strings and a missing tuning peg. You're ignoring all of it, focused, because now it's your turn. And this time you've got a feeling. You shake the dice in your palm, blow on them, because why not, and let them fall. One lands on a 6, the other teeters, then flops into a 2. Your opponent groans, you win. You barely crack a smile. Inside, though, a tiny celebration dances behind your eyes. Across the table, a boy with nervous hands is carving a tiny horse from a stick of firewood. His knife strokes quick and practiced. He's not playing, just watching. People do that. Not because the stakes are high, but because watching someone else focus gives them a break from their own spiralling thoughts. It's almost like prayer, but louder. Interestingly, some scholars argue that games like these were as important to mental health as food was to physical health. They kept people sharp, taught patterns, created connection in a world where relationships were often dictated by obligation and birth. Here, in this little pocket of chaos, you chose your company. You played, you laughed, you swore oaths over spilled beer and forgotten debts, and for just a sliver of time you weren't surviving. You were living. There's a fringe belief in your region that dice can predict the future. Not officially, of course. The church frowns on such things, but privately people whisper that if you roll double ones at midnight, it means death is coming for someone in the village. Double 6s, good harvest. Snake eyes on a Sunday, marriage. You've seen someone roll 3 times, spit on the dice and bury them under a crossroads to try and change their luck. It didn't work. He broke his arm chasing a goat the next day. You lean back in your chair, stretching out your legs and pocketing your winnings, 3 buttons, a half-carved wooden bead, and 1 highly suspicious coin that might just be tin. Still better than nothing. Your opponent smirks and reaches for the dice again. Of course, 1 more round, and this is how nights pass, quietly, with risk and laughter and the sound of old bones rolling over older wood. You feel the warmth of the fire on your ankles, the press of people around you, the comfort of routine wrapped in unpredictability. You lose the next round, obviously, and the one after that. Doesn't matter. You're here, you're playing, and that's the real trick, isn't it? In a world that doesn't care whether you'll wake up tomorrow, you find the one thing you can control, the toss of dice, the placement of stones, the sound of a game piece sliding into place. It's not just fun, it's a kind of defiance, a way to say, I still have time for this. So you keep playing. Even when your eyes grow heavy, even when the room spins slightly from bad ale and exhaustion, you press your luck one more time. Because games aren't a distraction from survival. Sometimes they are survival. You're holding a clay jug, it's warm from sitting near the fire, and you're gripping it like it holds the elixir of life, which, in a way, it does. It's full of urine, not fresh, thankfully. This is the good stuff, the kind that's been sitting for days and gone sharp with age, transformed from bodily waste into something almost sacred in its usefulness. Welcome to one of the strangest, most underappreciated tools in your medieval survival kit. Old pee. They call it chamber lye, or sometimes just stale urine, and it's weirdly valuable. You use it for laundry, you use it to tan hides, you use it to clean wounds when you've run out of anything better. In the cities, people literally collect it. They walk the alleys with pails and empty jugs, knocking on doors asking for your leftovers like milkmen in reverse. You've never had anyone knock at your door for your pee, but give it time. Your village is catching up. Right now, though, you're using it for cloth treatment. You've got a shirt that's grown stiff with grime, a tunic that smells like 4-day-old sheep sweat, and a pair of hose that have been through things no hose should endure. You soak them in the lye first. Just let them sit and stew in the pungent soup until the fabric softens and the smell somehow evens out. Then you rinse them in cold water, beat them against a rock, and hang them to dry on a crooked wooden line strung between 2 fence posts. It's unpleasant. No one's pretending otherwise. The smell gets into your nose and refuses to leave, even after you've scrubbed your hands with ash and wiped them on grass until your skin goes raw. But it works. That's the thing. It works. And out here, usefulness trumps dignity every time. There's an old woman in your village who uses it to bleach linen, and sets the soaked cloth in the sun for hours, then rinses it and repeats. Her tablecloths are whiter than snow, though no one wants to eat off them. You nod respectfully whenever you pass her garden. Her roses are suspiciously lush, and no one really asks why. You have theories. Urine shows up in unexpected places. Blacksmiths use it to quench hot metal and clean rust. Tanners soak animal hides in it to loosen hair and soften the leather. You've even seen it used in primitive gunpowder mixtures, saltpetre extracted from dirt and lye, and who knows what else. It's not just waste, it's alchemy. There's a fringe tale from a neighbouring village about a man who kept a sealed jar of his own urine under his bed to ward off evil spirits. They say the jar exploded during a thunderstorm and he lost all his hair, moral unclear but memorable. You remember once, during a particularly nasty winter, when your father got a gash from a falling branch. There was no clean water. Everything was frozen solid. Your mother dabbed the wound with a cloth soaked in warm urine. He lived. Maybe not because of the treatment, but maybe because of it. At the time you gagged. Now, you do the same. Scholars still argue about how widespread the practice really was. Some think it was more common in cities, where waste management doubled as commerce. Others point out archaeological evidence of rural washing stations and lye pits that suggest villages like yours weren't shy about repurposing the unmentionable. Either way, it was part of life. One of those things no one really wrote down because it was so normal it didn't seem worth the ink. And it's not just practical, it's social. When your family collects the contents of the chamber pot in the morning, it's someone's job to carry it out. Not a glamorous task, but a shared one. You've had full conversations, deep philosophical debates even, while carrying a sloshing jug down to the ditch. You learn a lot about people during waste duty. Once, someone tried to start a business bottling lye for sale in the next town over. He didn't last, not because of the product, which was good, but because he couldn't stop smelling like his merchandise. No one wanted to sit next to him at church. No one wanted to marry his daughter. Sad, but predictable. You lift the shirt from the rinse basin now, wringing it out until your arms ache. The fabric's soft, cleaner than it's been in months, and only faintly acidic. You hang it on the line and step back, admiring your work. 3 garments, washed without soap, scrubbed without lye-stone, dried by wind and filtered sunlight. Not exactly luxury, but then again luxury wouldn't last 5 minutes in your world. There's something strangely satisfying about it, you have to admit. Taking something most people would run from and turning it into a tool, it's a weird kind of power, the kind that says, I know something you don't. The kind that smells terrible but works anyway. You toss the last of the used rinse water into the weeds by the fence. Goats avoid that patch for a few days, which is fine. You tie up your sleeves, splash your face with clean water from the bucket, and head back toward the hut, leaving a trail of damp footprints and ghostly fumes behind you. Because this, more than anything, is what medieval survival looks like. It's not swords and shining armour. It's using everything, even the things no one wants to talk about. Especially those things. Turning waste into weapon, filth into function. And if it smells bad along the way, so be it. The forest doesn't speak in words, but you've learned to listen anyway. You step quietly under the arching boughs, boots brushing against soft moss and last year's leaves, the cold hush wrapping around you like a wool cloak soaked in mystery. The trees stretch above like cathedral spires, their trunks wide and pocked with age, their roots tangled across the forest floor like ancient veins. This isn't just a place for firewood and the occasional squirrel. It's a map, a memory, a living barometer. You don't just walk through the woods, you read them. You pause near a leaning beech, its bark smooth as tallow, marked by claw gouges from something you hope isn't still around. There's a scent on the wind, earthy, green and slightly wet. You kneel and press your hand to the soil. It crumbles easily, cool and damp. Rain's coming. Not now, not tonight, but soon. Maybe in 2 days, maybe 3. You know because the ants have shifted their trail to higher ground, because the birds are quiet, because the moss on the north-facing stones feels thick with moisture. These aren't omens, they're signs. Your grandmother called it listening to the trees. Others in the village call it superstition. But when a storm rolls in exactly when you said it would, they stop scoffing. You're not magic, you're just observant. Or maybe a little of both. You reach up and snap a twig from a hornbeam. It breaks clean and sharp. No bend, no green. That's a good firewood tree. Burns hot and slow. You run your fingers along its trunk, noting the greyish silver streaks in the bark, a sign the tree's healthy. You can tell which trees are dying, which are nursing others, which have secrets buried in their roots. You've seen where mushrooms bloom around a rotting oak's base. Death feeding life. That's the rhythm of the woods. Give, take, repeat. There's a fringe belief among older folk that certain trees whisper names before someone dies. Usually the yew, sometimes the willow. They say if you sleep beneath the wrong branch on the wrong night, you'll dream of a pale woman with roots for hair who'll show you your own grave. You've never met her, but you also don't sleep under willows, just in case. Superstition and survival tend to hold hands when no one's looking. You stop by a hollowed stump, its heart long gone, now filled with water and leaf debris. Inside, fat frog tadpoles wiggle lazily. That's a good sign. It means the water's clean. You dip your fingers in and taste it, just a drop like a thief stealing a secret. It's cold, metallic, but safe enough to boil for tea. You mark the spot in your mind. Next time you're out foraging, you'll fill a gourd. Around the bend of a deer trail, you find what you're really looking for, a patch of nettles growing near a sunlit break in the canopy. Their green is so vivid it almost hurts to look at. You pinch a leaf carefully through the fabric of your sleeve and sniff. Fresh, peppery. These'll be good for soup, maybe even medicine if Edric's cough comes back. You collect a handful, careful to avoid the sting, and tuck them into your pouch. In your world, this forest is more than background scenery. It's infrastructure. It gives you firewood, shelter, food, tools, even mabdom medicine. It also gives you warning, like when the leaves start falling early, not just 1 or 2, but in succulent drifting waves, and you know the frost will bite harder this year. Or when the blackbirds leave sooner than they should, or the foxes stop coming out at dusk. You read it all. Some scholars argue that medieval people were closer to nature simply because they had no other choice. Others say they infused nature with symbolism and fear because it gave shape to the unknown. You'd argue that both are true. The forest is scary. You've heard wolves howl, watched shadows move when nothing living should be out there. But it's also familiar. Predictable if you know how to listen. You sit now on a fallen log watching the sunlight pour in through the branches like syrup. Birds chirp cautiously again. A red squirrel chitters angrily from a branch overhead, irritated by your presence near its cache. You toss it a piece of dried apple in apology. It stares at you like you've just made an offering to a minor god. You think maybe you have. This is the other gift the forest gives. Peace. Not safety, never safety, but something deeper. A kind of companionship. You don't talk to the trees exactly, but you also don't feel alone. They creak and groan with the wind, rustling like gossiping elders who've seen every version of your troubles before. You swear one of them sounds like it's laughing sometimes. Maybe you're just tired. Maybe you're just finally listening right. You run your hand along the bark of a nearby ash, feeling the deep furrows, the texture of time. You think about planting something here someday. A sapling, maybe. Something that could grow long after you're gone. Because that's the strange, wonderful thing about survival in this world. It's not always about clawing your way through. Sometimes it's about leaving something behind. A trail, a grove, a story. You rise, nettles tucked away, hands dusty and scratched. The forest watches you leave but doesn't follow, doesn't need to. You'll be back. Because out here, the trees don't just grow, they remember. And they'll whisper what they know to anyone quiet enough to hear. You crouch beside a wooden box buried halfway into the packed earth floor, your knees cracking as you lift the lid. Inside is a burlap-wrapped bundle, still warm from the stone you tucked beside it hours ago. You reach in, unwrap it slowly, and lift out a small clay pot. It's heavy. Not because it's full, but because it worked. The grain inside is fully cooked, soft, steaming, fragrant. You grin, feeling like you've pulled off some kind of witchcraft. But it's not magic. It's just a hay box. No one outside your village really talks about hay boxes anymore. But here, they're survival gold. It's simple. You boil your stew or porridge or whatever strange concoction you've made that day. Then, instead of keeping it on the fire and wasting precious wood, you seal it tight and bury it in a box packed with hay. The hay traps the heat, cradles the pot like a sleepy animal, and lets the cooking finish on its own. It's slow cooking without the risk of burning, or smoke, or wandering off and coming back to a disaster. You fluff the hay to air it out, shaking off bits of grain and dust, then replace the stone, still faintly warm at the bottom of the box. The heat from just one rock can help keep your food hot for hours. Sometimes you add a second pot wrapped in cloth, one for porridge, one for a watery broth that's trying very hard to become a stew. The box doesn't care. It holds everything with the same gentle, insulating silence. There's something deeply satisfying about this kind of cooking. You did all the work earlier. Boiled the oats, added the foraged herbs, a chunk of root vegetable, maybe even a bit of salted meat if you were lucky. Now you just retrieve it, like a gift from the ground. And while it cooked, you chopped wood, or mended shoes, or, let's be honest, napped. Because the hay box is the one kitchen tool that doesn't punish you for multitasking. The concept itself is old, though historians still debate exactly how far back it goes. Some say medieval folk stumbled onto it while storing food in hay to keep it warm. Others point to monastic kitchens where economy and patience were valued more than flame. Either way, it spread quietly, not flashy, not grand, but deeply effective. A fringe variation uses moss instead of hay, especially up north, where moss is thick and everywhere. It holds moisture, true, but also clings to heat like a miser with coins. You've heard of families digging moss pits near their kitchens and using them the same way. One man in your village swears he once cooked an entire rabbit stew in a moss-lined clay oven, without touching fire after the first boil. The rabbit part is likely a lie. The moss part? Totally believable. You carry your pot to the table, placing it carefully on a cloth to avoid cracking the clay from the heat. Your little brother is already watching you like a hawk, holding a wooden spoon and bouncing on the balls of his feet. You give him a nod. Go ahead. He digs in, steam rising like ghosts from the spoon. He grins, mouth full of whatever this is, and nods. Success. This isn't just about convenience. It's about fuel. You don't have wood to burn all day. What you collect has to last. You don't get to stack logs to the rafters and throw them on the fire like it's a celebration. You measure every twig, every branch. A haybox stretches your resources, lets you eat warm without watching your fuel disappear. You clean the pot later with hot water and a rag dipped in ashes. No soap. Soap's rare, and you're not wasting it on cookware. The hay gets fluffed, checked for mould, then packed back down. You add a few dried lavender sprigs, partly for the smell, partly to keep mice out. Not that it always works. You've opened the lid before and found a mouse sitting on the pot lid like it owned the place. You stared at each other for a long moment. It ran. You didn't chase it. You've got a live and let live policy with anything small and brave. As evening creeps in, you prep the next meal for the haybox. Boil it now while there's still light and warmth, then bury it. Let the earth do the rest. Tomorrow you'll have hot food before the sun rises. That's the kind of planning most people don't think you're capable of, but they've never tried working with no fuel, no time, and a crowd of hungry siblings watching your every move. There's a quiet power to this kind of cooking. It requires patience, trust, a little bit of luck. You wrap the new pot in cloth, lower it back into the box and nestle it deep in the hay. Then you close the lid, place a stone on top to keep out curious hands and paws, and sigh. Done. Some say modern slow cookers are just electric hay boxes with better branding. And they're not wrong. But your box doesn't hum or beep. It doesn't need to. It just sits there, gently coaxing heat into barley and beans while the world turns outside. Later, when the stars come out and the fire burns low, you'll open the box again, feel that trapped warmth against your palms, and know you've done something clever. Ancient, practical, delicious. Because survival isn't always about brute strength or dramatic escapes. Sometimes it's just about knowing how to turn a pile of hay and a warm stone into a full belly in a quiet evening. The man walking toward you looks like something dragged out of a fever dream. He's wearing a long black cloak, heavy leather gloves, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. But it's his face, or what should be his face, that stops you cold. A long, curved beak juts out from beneath the hat, thin eye slits rimmed in glass above it. He looks like a crow trying to read scripture, like death dressed up for church. You step back without thinking. Everyone does. He's a plague doctor, or at least his best approximation of one. And whether he's an actual physician, or just some poor soul paid to poke at the dying is almost beside the point. He's here, and that means someone nearby is sick, really sick. The mask is terrifying on purpose. It's meant to protect, of course, but also to separate, to make the doctor not a man, but a symbol, a warning, a presence, inside the beak. A handful of herbs, lavender, rosemary, mint, wormwood, anything pungent. The idea is that bad smells cause disease and good smells might chase it away. Miasma theory, they call it now. Back then it was just what everyone knew. Air could kill, so stuff the air with flowers and hope for the best. The doctor doesn't speak to you. He nods once, moves past, his boots whispering over the mud. You watch him enter the cottage down the path, the door creaking shut behind him. No one else goes near that house now. The air around it feels heavy, like the fog itself knows to stay away. There's debate, even now, about how much those masks actually protected. The beak might have provided some filtration, barely. The leather layers? Better than nothing. But this wasn't real armour, it was psychological. You saw the mask, you knew things were bad. And for the person wearing it, it was a barrier. A way to walk into death without being entirely seen. You've heard stories of plague doctors who weren't even trained. Just men willing to wear the gear and carry the stick. Long, carved, used to prod patients from a distance. Some waved it like a wand, others like a weapon. Either way, it let them feel in control. You're not sure any of them ever really were. You remember the last time illness swept through your village. It wasn't the Great Plague, not the one the travelling friar talks about in hushed tones, but it was bad enough. People coughed blood. Boils rose under their arms. Children stopped speaking. The priest swung incense through the streets, chanting in Latin, while people covered their mouths with damp cloths soaked in vinegar. You burned old clothes, boiled everything. It didn't help. One woman buried her chickens, convinced they carried the sickness. Another ate only garlic for 10 days and swore it made her invisible to the disease. A third woman painted a red cross on her forehead with lamb's blood and stayed healthy. Coincidence? Maybe, but when you're terrified, anything feels like medicine. And yet some of it wasn't nonsense. Those herbs in the doctor's beak. Many have natural antiseptic properties. Burning rosemary actually does disinfect the air a little. Vinegar kills some bacteria. Even garlic, strong-smelling as it is, carries antimicrobial compounds. It wasn't science yet, but it was headed in the right direction. There's a fringe theory floating around that plague masks evolved more from theatrical costumes than medical necessity, that the image of the beak came later, exaggerated by art and fear. Some argue that most rural doctors never wore them at all, relying instead on scarves, hoods, or nothing at all. But whether the masks were real or symbolic, they worked. People feared them, respected them, avoided them. You hear a cry from the cottage, short, sharp, a child's voice. You freeze. A few moments later, the doctor emerges, wiping his gloves on a cloth that he tosses into the fire pit out front. He doesn't meet your eyes. He keeps walking. You don't ask what happened. You already know. That night you hang bundles of dried sage near the windows. Not because it will save you, but because it feels like doing something. You boil water with elderflower and thyme and leave bowls of it steaming in the corners. You light a rush candle and sit in the glow, trying not to picture the beaked mask outside your own door. Survival during plague times wasn't about medicine. It was about distance, isolation, faith, dumb luck, and rituals. So many rituals. You know people who throw salt into the fire every time someone sneezes, others who whisper protection charms into their bread dough. Your aunt swears by 3 knocks on the door before opening it, even if no one's there. And you listen for coughing at night. That's your ritual, the subtle rhythmic sound of a neighbour slipping. When it gets closer, when it comes from inside your own walls, that's when the real fear sets in. The beaked mask might come again, or it might not. You've learnt that plague doesn't care about warnings. It slips in like a draft, quiet and invisible, and takes what it wants. But tonight, you brew your tea, you stack wood, you keep the fire burning hot, and you press your fingers to the small pouch at your neck, full of crushed juniper and rosemary, and a fingernail-sized piece of iron. It smells sharp, metallic, familiar, because maybe the mask can't stop the plague, but you still believe in layers. You haven't spoken in hours, not because there's nothing to say, but because here, inside the cool stone walls of the monastery, silence is the rule. Your mouth itches with words, but you keep them pressed behind your teeth. Let them dissolve quietly while your hands knead the bread dough in the rhythmic practiced motions. The others around you do the same, heads bowed, lips shut, sleeves dusted with flour. The room is full of sound, but none of it comes from voices. There's the scrape of wooden spoons against bowls, the thump of fists in dough, the slow creak of floorboards under bare feet, and somehow all of it is louder than speech. You didn't join the monastery, not really. You were sent here for the season, a kind of arrangement between your village and the order. A few weeks of labour and discipline in exchange for instruction, meals, and the quietest kind of safety. The monks welcomed you with soft nods and lowered eyes. No oaths, no questions, just a place in the line. At first, the silence grated against you. Your thoughts raced like startled birds, flapping in the stillness. You wanted to ask what to do, where to go, how much flour to use. But here you watch, you mimic, you learn. In time, your questions grow still. Your hands remember what your tongue once asked. You become part of the quiet. You begin to realise how powerful it is, this silence. Out in the village, noise is survival. The barking of dogs, the creak of carts, the shouting of traders and children. Even in your own home, there's always sound, coughing, laughter, wind through the rafters. But here, within these walls, silence reigns. It presses in, cool and firm, like the hand of a parent keeping a child calm. It doesn't crush, it focuses. The monks don't just stay quiet for peace. For them, silence is spiritual, sacred. A way of listening more closely, not just to the world, but to themselves. And maybe to God if he's speaking that day. But even if he's not, they listen anyway. And in doing so, they've unlocked something strange and useful. Silence sharpens survival. You notice it first when you're walking the herb garden, feet crunching on gravel paths. A bird takes off nearby, wings thrumming the air. Before, you might have missed it. But now you hear every detail. You know the soft plink of water from the cistern, the subtle rustle of rosemary in the wind. You even hear the bees, individual bees, visiting the lavender one by one. The world isn't silent. You were just too loud to hear it before. Silence also makes you quicker, sharper. You pick up on body language like a hunter stalking game. A glance tells you who needs help lifting the bread trays. A flick of a sleeve means someone needs the flour bucket. A subtle shifting of feet. Time to clean the tools. No one tells you these things, you just learn. Because when no one speaks, everything else becomes language. There's a fringe belief among monks that speech burns energy, spiritual energy. That every word costs something. So they spend theirs sparingly like coins. Only the abbot speaks regularly. And even then, in low tones, carefully chosen phrases. You begin to think of words the same way. Do you really need to say that? Would a look do, a gesture? Could you replace it with stillness? You've never been more observant than in this place. You notice how Brother Thomas always chews the inside of his cheek when he's deep in thought. How the oldest monk's fingers tremble when he slices bread, but his grip is perfect when lifting a full water bucket. You notice how the cat that lives near the kitchen only visits in the late afternoon, and only walks counterclockwise around the garden. No one has said a single word about it. But you all know, outside the monastery, silence can be deadly. You've heard stories, bandits moving silently at night, plague spreading through quiet houses, wolves slipping past shepherds who forgot to whistle. But inside these walls, silence becomes armour, a strategy, a state of readiness. Without speech, there's no arguing, no gossip, no lies, just action. One monk spends his mornings weaving baskets without looking up, another tends bees, and when he walks among the hives, he hums, not loudly, but just enough to blend in. It calms the bees, it calms him, no veil, no gloves, just presence. You watch mesmerised, wondering how many stings it took before he learned the right pitch. There's a scholarly debate about whether monastic silence had real survival value, or was just a spiritual tool, but to you, it's both. You felt it change you, felt your own thoughts slow, stretch, and settle like dough under a linen cloth. You've stopped blurting your fears, started noticing your instincts. You even think your dreams are quieter. One night as you stoke the hearth coals in the main hall, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the polished copper kettle. You look different, not older, just calmer, like someone who sees in the dark. You didn't ask for that. You didn't expect it. But here it is. The silence hasn't made you weak. It's made you aware. It's turned you into a listener. And in the medieval world, listeners survive. They hear the gossip before it's dangerous. They catch the warning in a shift of the wind. They sense the presence of someone outside the hut at night, before the dog even lifts its head. When your time at the monastery ends, you pack your small bundle in silence. The monks nod to you one by one in perfect unison. No goodbyes, just understanding. As you step beyond the stone arch and back onto the muddy road, the noise of the world slams into you like a wave. Birds, carts, voices, goats bleating, chaos. But you don't flinch. You walk into it with quiet in your bones. Because now, you know, sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing at all. Your fingers are sticky, warm, and faintly golden. You've just sliced open a hunk of honeycomb, and the wax is oozing like slow sunlight down the edge of your crude wooden blade. It smells like everything good in the world. Flowers, summer air, the sweetness of effort. You pop a corner of the comb into your mouth, and it crunches softly between your teeth, the honey flooding over your tongue with a burst of flavour so rich it feels like sin. It's not just food, it's medicine. And in your world, it might be the closest thing to magic you've got. You lean back against the hive wall, chewing the wax slowly, watching the bees dance around the entrance to their box. They've calmed now. Earlier, when you opened the hive, they were angry, a low, buzzing warning that rippled through your clothes and made your skin tingle. You moved slowly, respectfully. Smoke helps, of course. You burned dried thyme in a pot, wafted the haze over the hive like incense at a funeral, and waited for their anger to soften. It worked. Mostly. Beekeeping isn't just a job. It's a relationship, one built on patience, observation, and the daily risk of being stung into oblivion. The hives aren't fancy, just wooden boxes stacked near the garden, with slats you've carved yourself and a little wax starter to give the colony something to build on. You treat them well, and in return they give you sweetness, wax, and most importantly healing. Because honey isn't just a treat, it's your first aid kit. Someone slices their palm on a scythe, honey. A burn from the hearth, honey. A rash from God knows what, also honey. You clean the wound with clean water, or spit if you're desperate, then smear on the golden stuff and wrap it tight with linen. Honey draws out infection, seals the wound, and keeps it from going septic. You've seen it work more than once. Edric's hand is proof. Then there's the wax. Beeswax is gold you can melt. You use it for candles, of course, those slow-burning little pillars of civilization that keep the darkness from swallowing your nights. But you also use it to seal jars, coat thread to make it water-resistant, and even mix with pitch to make rudimentary salves. One time you combined beeswax with pig fat and yarrow and rubbed it into your brother's swollen knee. He limped for 3 days less than expected. Coincidence? Maybe. But you wrote down the recipe anyway. People in the village think you're strange for tending bees. Most leave that work to monks or the eccentrics who talk to plants. You're fine with that, less competition. And besides, the bees do talk, just not with words. They dance, literally, you've seen it. A waggle, a turn, a tiny circular sachet across the comb. It means something, distance, direction, food. No one in the village believes you, but you watch. You know, there's a fringe belief in some parts of the kingdom that bees are messengers between the living and the dead. That if someone in your household dies, you have to tell the bees. Whisper it to the hive, or they'll leave. Or worse, they'll die. You did that when your uncle passed. Stood there in the cold dawn and whispered through the smoke. He's gone now. The bees buzzed louder. You took that as acknowledgement. Scholars debate whether medieval people understood the science of honey's antimicrobial powers. Some say it was all anecdotal, the old "it just works" approach. Others point to texts written by monastic healers detailing wound treatments, syrup infusions, and even honey-based eye salves. The truth probably lives somewhere in the middle. You may not know the chemistry, but you know the results. Honey doesn't rot, it doesn't sour, it preserves. That's enough. You carry a small pot of it with you most days, tucked in your belt pouch, sealed with wax and hope. A smear on hard bread makes a feast. A spoonful in hot water becomes tea. A dab on a cut keeps the rot away. You've used it to soothe a baby's cough, to sweeten bitter herbs, even to bribe a particularly stubborn goose. It worked. She walked right back into the pen like she owned it. Even more strange? You once heard a rumour, probably nonsense, that some travellers embalmed their dead in honey, packed the body in it like a jar of pickles, claimed it kept the flesh clean even in the heat. You laughed when you heard it, then paused. Because, well, it could work. You haven't tested it. Yet. You look down at your hands now, sticky with proof, and wipe them on the edge of your tunic. It leaves a smear, but that's fine. You'll wash later. You lift the last chunk of comb to your lips and take another bite, savouring the texture. Soft, waxy, with the gentle crunch of wild sweetness. You think of the flowers that made this, the miles the bees flew, the tiny miracles stacked one on top of another until they became a thing you can hold in your hands. Later tonight, you'll burn one of your beeswax candles, watch the flame flicker in the stillness, feel the glow brush your face, and maybe, if the wind is just right, you'll whisper thanks to the hive. Because survival in this world isn't always about fire and iron. Sometimes it's about tiny wings, soft wax, and something so sweet it heals you from the inside out. There's a tunnel under your feet. You can't see it, but you know it's there. You've walked over it 100 times without thinking, but today, standing just inside the castle yard, you pause. Your boots sink slightly into the moss-covered stones, and your mind sinks with them, down into the dark, narrow passage below. It's not a rumour. It's not some castle ghost story whispered by candlelight. It's real. You've seen the entrance. You first stumbled across it while helping to haul firewood near the granary. A corner of the wall crumbled loose in the rain, revealing a hollow space behind. You cleared it with your hands, mud, roots, old bricks, and there it was, a low, arched opening leading into the earth, just tall enough for a child to slip through without ducking. Naturally, you ducked. Inside, it was colder than you expected, the kind of cold that doesn't belong to weather. It felt old, patient, and slightly damp, like the breath of someone who's been holding it for centuries. The passage twisted left, then right, then down. You followed it for maybe 20 feet before panic clawed at your ribs. You backed out, hands shaking, heart pounding like you'd outrun something invisible. You told no one, not even your brother, not even your mother. The tunnel felt private. These tunnels aren't unusual in castles, though people pretend they're secret. Truth is, most were built on purpose. Escape routes for lords under siege, smuggling paths, storage. A place to move soldiers unseen. Some connect to nearby woods, others to rivers or dried-up wells. A few go nowhere at all, just dead-end chambers that once served a purpose no one remembers. And some were built to collapse behind you. A one-way trip out of a burning castle. You asked a visiting mason about them once, casually, like you weren't itching to hear every buried detail, and he nodded sagely. The older the stone, the longer the memory, he said, tapping his temple. They built down before they built up. Then he winked, which didn't help at all. There's a fringe theory in some circles that these tunnels weren't just practical, that they were spiritual. Pathways not just for bodies, but for souls. Some monks claimed the tunnels were symbolic birth canals, passages from darkness into light, a place to transform. Others whispered of pagan rites that took place underground, where no Christian god could see. It's nonsense, probably. Probably. Still, there's a reason you've never gone all the way to the end. You once heard of a man who did, a servant in another keep, who followed a tunnel down and kept walking, torch flickering in the gloom. Hours passed. When he returned, his eyes were wild, his hands shaking. He refused to speak about what he saw. A week later he left the castle, disappeared into the woods. The Lord said he'd gone mad. You think he found something he wasn't supposed to. Today, as you stand above that forgotten entrance, You wonder what would happen if you lit a torch and crawled back inside. If you followed the tunnel all the way to its end, would it open into sunlight, into a crypt, into someone else's story entirely? These tunnels were survival tools, after all. When enemies breached the gates, you didn't stand and fight. You slipped away, quiet as smoke. You carried messages, led children through the dark, hauled grain and weapons in secret. You lived to see another day because someone had the foresight to dig through stone and soil, to carve a second chance beneath the foundations. You kneel, brushing your fingers along the edge of the stone where the wall cracked all those months ago. It's overgrown now, but the hollow is still there, still waiting. You could clear it again in minutes. Just one push, one more step into the unknown. But instead, you stand. Because knowing the tunnel is there is enough, for now. You've got other work, firewood to stack, a cloak to mend, a castle kitchen to help scrub down before the steward checks your hands for soot and judgment. Still, as you leave the yard, your mind stays behind, rooted in that tunnel. The idea that beneath the stone towers and shouting guards and clatter of armour, there's a world no one sees, a world where escape is possible, where the ground itself remembers how to keep a secret. Later that night, when the castle quiets, you'll lie in your straw-stuffed bed and imagine moving through the dark. One hand against the cold stone wall, the other holding a flickering torch. You'll count the steps. You'll imagine the air growing thinner, the sounds of footsteps behind you that aren't yours, the sudden sense of movement where there should be none, and then, just before sleep takes you, you'll reach the end. Not light, not death, just a door. You don't open it, not yet. The bucket is heavier than it should be, sloshing against your leg as you carry it down the winding path behind the pig pens. The smell is incredible. Not in a good way, but in a way that makes your eyes water and your stomach twitch. Thick, sweet rot. A bouquet of barnyard spoiled milk and old cabbage. You've gone nose-blind to most of it over the years, but every so often, like today, the full force of the stench ambushes you. You gag a little, keep walking. You're headed to the midden, the heap where the waste of village life piles up like some foul monument. Manure, kitchen scraps, broken straw, feathers, hair clippings, ashes, bones, and of course night soil. That's the polite term for what's in your bucket. Human waste, piss and dung collected from the chamber pots under every bed, poured carefully down the drain or hauled, like this, by hand. Not glamorous, not optional. What most people today don't realise is that medieval folks didn't waste anything, not even waste. That pile of filth behind your house, it's compost gold. A rotting stew that in time becomes the fertile base of next year's crops. And when it's shoveled and sifted and finally laid out across the fields, no one says thank you. But they should. Because without this stink, there is no food, no bread, no life. You reach the pit and dump the bucket in, stepping back quickly to avoid the splash zone. Then you grab a rake and stir, slowly, thoughtfully, because mixing the pile evenly helps it break down faster. You learnt that from the old man who used to manage the mill. He swore by a method. Animal waste first, kitchen scraps second, night soil on top, all stirred with straw. Let it sleep over the winter and by spring it'll wake up singing, he said. You didn't believe him, then you saw how green his cabbage grew. There's a fringe tale that some apothecaries used human feces in medicine. Dried, powdered, mixed with honey, and applied to infections. You wish that was a joke. It isn't. The recipe was passed around in whispers, usually with a warning not to try it unless you were very sure of the source. That's the thing with ancient survival. It often walks a thin line between genius and horrifying. And what about money? You wouldn't believe how valuable human waste became in the cities. Entire professions grew around it. The nightmen, or gong farmers, collected it from privies and cesspits and sold it to tanners, dyers and farmers. If you've got a steady hand and no sense of smell, it's a surprisingly lucrative trade. Dangerous too. People died falling into those pits. No one builds a statue for a man who drowns in a toilet, but maybe they should. He was keeping the city alive. In your village, you share responsibility for the midden. Every household contributes, and every household reaps the benefit. There's a kind of grim honour in it. You're not just taking out the trash, you're feeding the future, turning decay into dinner. It's slow magic, smelly magic, but it works. Scholars still debate how advanced medieval composting really was. Some argue it was accidental, just the natural consequence of putting waste in one place and letting nature handle the rest. Others think it was more deliberate, more scientific than it gets credit for. You side with the second group. No one who grows their own food ignores what makes it grow better. You don't need a degree to notice that onions planted in poop-fed soil grow fat and sweet. After stirring the pile, you cover it with dry leaves. Keeps the smell down a little. Keeps the flies at bay. The crows watch from a nearby fence post, heads cocked, waiting for you to walk away so they can pick through the top layer. You let them. They help keep the rat population in check. Everyone plays a part. Later you'll return with ashes from the hearth, rich in potassium and good for balancing the acidity of the pile. Maybe some leftover fish bones, which break down slowly but feed the earth deep. The mix matters. You've learnt not to add meat scraps too often, they attract dogs. And worse, you don't want to be out here after dark hearing something dig through your midden, like it's searching for answers. Inside the house, the work continues. Chamber pots need to be scrubbed, the privy relimed with ash, and the buckets rinsed. Not in the stream, of course. That's for drinking and cooking. You rinse with grey water, already used wash water, sometimes boiled, sometimes not. Dull. You wipe your hands with a rag soaked in vinegar, and hope it's enough. Sometimes it is, sometimes you get sick, but when everything's dangerous, you learn to live with a little filth. Your neighbour once told you she marks her compost pile with a charm, a carved stick pressed into the earth with a spiral scratched on one end. She says it keeps bad spirits from gathering around the rot. You smile politely, then added a stick of your own. Doesn't hurt to try. As evening falls, the smell clings to your tunic no matter how many times you shake it out. You change before supper, toss the dirty clothes outside for tomorrow's laundry, and when your mother puts a bowl of steaming root stew in front of you, you say thank you, because you know what went into the soil that fed the plants that filled this pot, and you know that sometimes the difference between starving and surviving comes down to who was brave enough to stir the muck. The rooster's been up for hours, but it's the crows that wake you, not their caws, though those are annoying enough. It's the frantic flapping, the sudden gust of air as a dozen black wings explode upward from the thatched roof. You sit up bleary-eyed and peer through the slit of a window in time to see them circling, shrieking their morning gossip, then darting off toward the edge of the woods. Something startled them. You don't know what, and maybe you don't want to. But the crows do, and that's the thing about birds in your world. They're more than background noise. They're survival tech, feathered barometers, your unofficial alarm system. You've learned to watch them the way a sailor watches the sea. When the crows go quiet, something's wrong. When they leave, something worse is coming. And when they land on your roof in the middle of the night, you tie an herb bundle under your pillow and sleep with one eye open. You step outside, rubbing your eyes, and scan the trees. The sparrows are still in their usual hedgerow, bouncing between brambles. The finches are louder than usual, which means rain later. Probably. But the crows? Gone. You feel it in your chest before your mind catches up, like someone tugged a thread that's connected to your gut. Birds have always been part of the medieval codebook. Long before you could read, you were reading them. The sky isn't empty. It's full of signs. The way birds move, where they land, how they sing. That's the real forecast. You've seen your grandmother delay a harvest just because the starlings were flying too low. She was right. That storm hit like a punishment. And then there are the geese. You glance over toward the coop, and sure enough, your little honking army is still pacing like guards on patrol. Geese aren't just food, they're security. They hear things before you do, smell things, sense vibrations in the earth, maybe. You've seen them hiss at travellers long before the dog even lifted his head. They're like feathered watchdogs with judgmental attitudes. You remember the night one of them wouldn't shut up, honking and flapping long past dusk. You went outside with a stick, ready to scold, only to spot a figure slipping through the trees near the edge of the field. Not a fox, not a shadow. A man. 2 of them, actually. You never found out what they were up to, but you double-latched the door after that, and gave the goose a second helping of oats. Fair's fair. It's not just local law either. Some scholars believe geese were the original security system in certain monastic communities. There's even an old Roman account of geese saving an entire fortress by squawking at invaders sneaking in during the dead of night. People laughed at first. Then they started building their goose pens a little closer to the gates. But crows? Crows are the complicated ones. Clever, chaotic, and definitely watching. You've seen them open bags, steal shiny things, even mimic the dog's bark. One time you heard your own voice shouted back at you from a tree branch. Still not over that. They're either messengers of death or prophets of weather, or both, depending on who you ask. You tend to think they just know things we don't. There's a fringe belief in your village that crows carry the souls of the dead, that when someone dies, the crow population near your house spikes. Your great-uncle kept a log for a while, counted crows every morning, tracked them against deaths in the region. The chart was unnerving. He burned it one night during a lightning storm. Didn't explain why. Some folks talk to their birds, not out of madness, but habit. You've heard your mother murmur to the hens while gathering eggs, asking them to bless the basket. You've seen your brother bow slightly to the owl that lives in the barn rafters, not because it's sacred, because it sees, and seeing things in your world means something. Today the sky is heavy and low, the air is thick, not with heat, but with the kind of tension that comes before something breaks. A branch snaps in the distance, the geese twitch, but don't honk. That's worse than honking. Silence from geese is like silence from a toddler. You start walking toward the field with your knife already in your hand, just in case. You don't find anything. No wolves, no figures, just prints in the mud. Deer, maybe, or something pretending to be a deer. You don't know. You whisper a little charm to yourself as you walk back, one you half remember from a wandering midwife. Feather fall, shadow flee, leave no dark inside of me. Doesn't rhyme well, but it's not supposed to. Later you set a mirror near the window. Just a small one, shiny side out. Another charm. Crows respect mirrors, or hate them. Either way, it keeps them from landing too close. You tuck a goose feather behind the frame and step back. Now the house feels watched in a good way. People like to think medieval life was isolated. They heard that it was all mud and superstition and ignorance. But you've never been more connected. You just speak a different language, the language of wings and calls and patterns in the sky. You listen when the air changes, when the birds fall silent, when your geese start looking at the door instead of the sky. Because sometimes the best tool you have is a feather, and the best warning system wakes you up before the danger has a name. You're digging again, this time behind the main hut where the frost still clings to the roots like stubborn ghosts. The shovel, really just a bent piece of iron tied to a stick, slices into the earth with slow, rhythmic effort. Your breath fogs the air. You pause only when your back starts to scream, straightening with a groan and wiping sweat from your brow with a dirty sleeve. The pit's almost ready, not for a body, for food. You're building a root cellar, or rather, maintaining the one your grandfather started decades ago. It's not fancy, just a deep hole lined with stones and thatched over with turf, a wooden door fitted crookedly into the frame to keep the animals out. But this little chamber beneath the ground might just be the most important room on your property. Because in the medieval world, refrigeration doesn't mean ice, it means planning. You ease your way down into the pit where the air changes. It's always cooler here, cool enough to preserve cabbages for months, carrots well into spring, and the occasional salted haunch if you're lucky enough to have one. You press your palm to the stone wall. Cold, even in high summer. The earth is steady like that. You trust it more than the weather. Most of the time you store things in baskets, crates, or just wrapped in cloth and stacked carefully along the edge. The trick is to keep everything dry. Damp ruins everything. You learned that the hard way when a whole barrel of apples rotted through last year. Sticky, sour and full of squirming larvae. You swore then you'd never be lazy about drainage again. Above ground you can smell winter creeping in. The ground's going stiff and the air bites through wool faster than you'd like. But down here, it's still September. Time moves slower underground. And when the first snow falls, you'll come down here, light in hand, and feel like you've cheated the season somehow. This kind of storage isn't unique to your village. Across the land, people have their own versions: pit storage, underground pantries, ice houses if you're rich and noble. Some families dig sideways into hills, carving cool chambers right into the slope, sealed with stone and faith. Others stack straw bales around barrels to insulate them. You do what you can with what you've got, and if you really know what you're doing, you build an ice pit. You've seen one, once. It was deep in the woods, ringed with moss-covered stones and lined with hay. It didn't look like much, just a covered pit with a thick wooden lid. But when the old hunter pulled it open, there it was. A mound of snow and ice, still solid, even in mid-June. He used it to keep his fish fresh, said it made the meat sing. You believed him? You still dreamin' about that fish? Some scholars believe ice pits go back to Roman times, maybe even further. The idea is simple. Harvest ice from frozen rivers, pack it tight in straw and sawdust, and bury it deep. The insulation keeps it frozen for months. It's not reliable for everyone. Not enough cold in the south, not enough storage in the cities, but for those who can manage it, it's a miracle. There's even a fringe tale about a lord who kept fruit chilled in an ice chamber all summer long. Peaches, in August. Imagine biting into something soft and cold while everyone else is eating dried beans and wilted greens. You don't know if it's true, but you want it to be. Back in your root cellar, you check your supplies. A basket of parsnips, already dusted in dirt and stacked like bones. Cabbages hanging from twine, leaves still crisp, onions in a mesh of woven reed, dried and curled, and potatoes, wrinkled, tough-skinned, but dependable. You test each one for rot, tossing a soft one into the corner where you'll dig a compost pit later. There's a small earthenware jar nestled in a nook near the door. It's full of lard. Your mother buried it here herself, sealed it with beeswax and wrapped it in linen. You tap it once, smile and leave it be. That's for when things get desperate, or festive, or both. Your cousin once tried to use the cellar to store milk. Bad idea. Spoiled within a day. Thick and yellow, the kind of smell you can't wash off with vinegar or prayers. But butter? Butter can last weeks if it's kept cool and packed in brine. Cheese even longer, especially the hard stuff. You've seen wheels buried like treasure, dug up with ceremony and eaten like royalty. Some families go further, sealing meats in lard, drying them first, wrapping them in cloth and suspending them from rafters like upside-down gifts. It's not foolproof. One wrong cut, one rat, one leak, and the whole stash goes to ruin. But when it works, you get the taste of summer in the dead of winter. That's worth the risk. There's a kind of reverence in this work. The careful stacking, the wrapping, the quiet prayer whispered as you tuck each item away. You're not just storing food, you're storing time, storing hope. A barrel of apples in December is a kind of miracle. A sack of garlic in March is proof you were wise months ago. Survival here isn't about the moment, it's about every moment before it. You close the cellar door, lay the wooden plank across it, and heap straw on top. Not just for warmth, but to hide it. You've seen what hunger does to people. When spring comes too slowly, even neighbours start eyeing each other's firewood piles and food stores. You trust most folks, but not all of them, not when their children cry at night. As you walk back to the house, you look over your shoulder once, just to make sure everything's as it should be. It is. Still closed, still quiet, still waiting, because down there in the cold dark lies your insurance against the cruel whims of sun and frost. A cache of calories and caution, the ancient refrigerator that never hums, never buzzes, never fails, unless you do. You're squinting through smoke, eyes stinging as the flames hiss and pop inside the rough stone oven. The heat brushes your face like an open hand, dry, almost blinding. You squint harder. It's nearly time. The loaf on the flat wooden paddle is ready. You've been tending the dough since before first light, kneading with numb fingers, watching it rise like something half alive. And now it goes to the fire. Because you, dear friend, are the baker today, and bread, simple, fragrant, absolutely necessary bread, isn't just food. It's currency. It's survival. It's status. The oven was preheated hours ago, built up with split logs and dry sticks, then raked clean of coals, the heat trapped inside the thick walls like a secret. You step forward, sliding the paddle in with a practice shove. The dough lands with a soft thump on the hot stone. You don't slam the door, just nudge it closed with a cloth-wrapped hand, sealing the heat, sealing the moment. It's out of your hands now. You wipe your forehead, soot and flour mingling into a smudge of honesty. You've burned yourself in that oven before. You've ruined dough. You've cried over a collapsed loaf that fed no one. But when it works, oh, when it works, it feels like you've bent the world just slightly in your favour. You turn flour, water, salt and wild yeast into something warm and alive, and that in your world is nothing short of a miracle. Bread is the spine of your diet, everyone's diet. Pottage might come and go, turnips get soft, beans grow mould, but bread is there through feast and famine. When times are good, it's soft and light, maybe even dotted with nuts or bits of dried apple. When times are lean, it's heavy, dense, the colour of mud, made with whatever grains haven't gone bad and stretched with husk and bran until it barely qualifies. But either way, it fills, and filling is enough. You use a mix of barley and rye today. Wheat is too expensive unless you're up at the manor. Barley's coarser, but it's hearty. Rye has a sourness that stays in the mouth like a memory. Together, they rise decently. The yeast? Wild, captured from the air, and kept alive in a small crock that bubbles at the back of the hearth like a living pet. You feed it flour and water every day, whisper to it sometimes, and hope it doesn't die. If it does, you have to start again, or borrow someone else's, and that's a whole barter negotiation in itself. The strange truth about medieval baking? You rarely have full control. The weather affects your rise, the wood affects your oven temperature, the air decides whether your crust will crack or crisp. There's no timer, no thermometer, just instinct and experience, and a whole lot of trial and error. There's an open scholarly debate about whether most villagers baked at home or took their dough to communal ovens. The answer is both. Some villages have their own oven, watched over by a baker who charges a fee, a coin or a chunk of dough. Other families build crude earthen ovens behind their huts. Yours, somewhere in between. The oven is shared, but you maintain it, and because of that, people sometimes give you favours. You don't ask, but they come. There's a fringe belief in your village that the shape of your loaf affects its luck. Round loaves for blessings, long ones for growth, cross-scored tops to ward off evil spirits. You've also heard that if your bread cracks on one side during baking, someone in the household has told a lie. You check every loki at every loaf, just in case. The scent now begins to change, sharp and warm, the aroma curling out from the cracks of the oven door. You inhale deeply. It smells like home, like a fire that won't go out. You open the door carefully, shielding your face, and peek inside. The loaf is golden, the edges darker, the base lifted. You slide the paddle in and retrieve it, setting the bread on a cloth-covered board to cool. Steam rises from it in a long exhale, and for a moment, the whole room smells like something holy. You tap the bottom, hollow. That's a good sign. You tear off a small piece from the edge. It's still hot enough to burn your tongue if you're not careful. And chew. It's decent. A little dense. Could have used another hour to rise. But edible. More than edible. You close your eyes. That bite might be your only one today. The rest goes to the family. Or maybe to barter. Because bread is currency here. You've traded loaves for mended boots. For firewood. For a cracked clay pot you patched with wax and still use to this day. Once, you gave a half-stale round to a passing tinker, in exchange for a song you still hum when the wind sounds lonely. There's another loaf waiting, one you started late last night, an experiment with oats and mashed beans. You have no idea if it will be terrible or brilliant, but that's part of the joy. Baking isn't just routine, it's creation. You shape something soft, let it rise, expose it to fire and hope it emerges better. Isn't that a metaphor for all of this? And when the bread's done, you mark it, not just with a cut or a cross, but your own little flourish. 3 dots pressed with a stick, like a constellation. It's your signature, your claim. You'll know your bread on a shelf of others, and so will your neighbours. Tonight, as you tear the loaf apart at the table, the crust crackling, the inside steaming, you'll watch your family eat in silence. There's reverence in the first bite, and if the loaf lasts until morning, someone will tuck the last slice into a cloth for the road. Because when you carry bread, you carry survival. It's not just food, and it's the reason you made it through another day. The stars are bright tonight, unreasonably so. You lie flat on your back in the grass beyond the edge of the fields, cloak wrapped tight around your shoulders, staring up at the sky like it owes you an answer. No fire, no torch, just the glow of the heavens, white, silver, cold. The moon is thin, barely a scrap of light, but the stars are showing off. You can see the arc of the Milky Way stretching across the black, a spilled line of powdered bone and starlight. They call it the star path. You just call it familiar. Because you've been using the stars your whole life, even before you understood what they were. You were born into a world without compasses, without maps that meant anything to people like you. The stars are the map. The moon tells you when to plant. Orion tells you where the seasons are headed. The North Star, always there, always fixed, tells you which way to walk when you're lost. Tonight, you're not lost. Not really, but you are thinking, wondering, wishing, maybe, though you'd never admit it out loud. You've spent the last year surviving things most people in the future won't believe were survivable. Winters that cracked your nails open. Illnesses that drained the colour from your family's faces. Hunger that made your bones louder than your voice. And yet you're still here, somehow, stubborn, scarred, breathing. Above you, constellations drift like old stories. You know them all, not the official names, but the village versions. That crooked W near the horizon, that's the Witch's Comb. The 3 stars in a row overhead, the King's Belt. The cluster near your left shoulder is called the chickens, which you've always thought was a bit underwhelming for a cosmic formation, but it's tradition. And in your world, tradition sticks. Not all navigation happens with stars, though. You've walked the land long enough to know its texture, how the moss grows thicker on the north side of trees, how rivers always carve their own kind of logic through valleys, how if you close your eyes and listen to the wind, you can almost hear which way the hills lean. Your uncle taught you that. He'd take you out on moonless nights, make you find your way home by sound and feel. The stars aren't always there, he'd say, but the earth is. You hated it then. You'd trip, fall, swear, but now it feels like he gave you something sacred, a different kind of sight. There's a scholarly argument, apparently, there, about how accurate medieval stargazing really was. Some say people barely knew what they were looking at, just patterns in the sky with no real science behind it. Others insist there was a deep, almost obsessive knowledge of celestial movement, especially among sailors and monks. You fall somewhere in the middle. You don't chart the heavens with tools, but you know them, the way a shepherd knows his flock, the way a child knows which tree to climb and which one holds wasps. You shift, folding your arms behind your head, and watch a meteor streak past. Fast, silence, sudden. You whisper a blessing under your breath. Not a wish. That's too soft. A blessing. For continued direction, for steady feet. There's an old fringe belief in your village that stars aren't just distant fires. They're souls. Some say they're the lanterns of the dead, lighting the way for the living. Others think each one is a god's eye, keeping watch. You've never been sure which to believe, but you do believe the sky is watching. You've felt it. Late at night, when the wind dies down and the clouds part like curtains, the stars feel close, personal, like they're not just telling you where to go, but asking if you're still paying attention. You are. You always are. Your favourite constellation isn't one of the grand ones. It's a crooked little bend of 5 stars near the edge of the eastern sky. You call it the bowl. Your brother swears it's shaped like a broken shoe, but he's wrong. It's a bowl, just like the one your mother uses to catch rainwater. And every year, when it rises higher in the sky, you know the dry season is ending. You wonder what someone 1,000 years from now will think, staring up at these same stars. Will they have names for them too? Different ones, probably. Will they laugh at the idea of the chickens? Will they know what it meant to rely on a single glowing dot in the sky to guide them home? Maybe. Maybe not. But the stars will still be there. And so will the memory of you. If not your name, then your pattern, your walk, your way. Because survival isn't just about keeping your body fed or your fire lit. It's about knowing where you are, where you've been, where you're headed. And when the world goes dark, and it always does eventually, you'll lie back in the grass, look up at the map of the sky, and remember, you're not lost. You're just between stories. So now you lie there, tucked into whatever counts as a blanket. Maybe it's wool, maybe it's straw and a dream. Eyes drifting half-elided as the sounds of medieval life settle like dust after a storm. The fire's low, the night is still. Even the wind outside seems to be holding its breath. And in the quiet, your mind begins to drift backward, not forward. Through all the moments you've just lived again, step by painstaking step. You remember the first cold splash of stream water over your cracked knuckles, the way the forest smelled before rain, how your fingers tingled pulling honeycomb from the hive, like it owed you something sweet for surviving. You recall how the stars looked overhead, like they were stitched into the sky just for you, and the silence, both the comforting kind behind monastic walls, and the sharp kind, where geese stop honking and something dangerous watches from the trees. These weren't just facts from dusty scrolls or quirky footnotes. You felt them. You were them. And now that you've trudged through this entire wild and muddy journey, maybe you understand something ancient, something that still hums inside us no matter how many centuries go by. That survival wasn't just blood and battles. It was bread. It was bees. It was burying onions so they wouldn't rot and digging tunnels so your family could live to see the frost melt. It was waking early to boil porridge, seal wounds with honey, and trust a goose to guard your back. It was finding warmth not in fire alone, but in the quiet work of keeping things, anything, alive. And sure, we've progressed. We've got buttons that order food, machines that hum comfort into every room. But tonight, let's admit something we rarely do. We've forgotten a few tricks. Important ones. Beautiful, scrappy, resourceful ones. And maybe just maybe, remembering them. Here, in the safety of your soft, flickering imagination, is the first step toward not needing them too late. So now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on that fan for the soft background hum. Let your breathing settle. Let the world go quiet around you. You're safe. You've earned this peace. Sleep well, little survivor of long-lost ages.